Welcome to Grim True. Today we are diving deep into the entire story of one of the most terrifying and authentic supernatural entities ever depicted in modern cinema, King Paimon. But this isn't just another horror movie breakdown. What we're about to explore goes far beyond fiction into the realm of genuine occult history and forbidden knowledge that has been hidden in plain sight for over a millennium. So let's understand this. The ancient libraries of Europe hold secrets that most scholars dare not speak of openly, their dusty shelves lined with texts that predate the rise of Christianity and contain knowledge that challenges the very foundations of accepted reality. Among these forbidden volumes, certain names appear with disturbing consistency across cultures, languages, and centuries, suggesting that some entities transcend the boundaries of human imagination and exist as genuine forces within our world. Paimon stands as one of the most prominent and terrifying examples of this phenomenon, his name etched into grimoires and magical texts that span over a millennium of occult scholarship. The earliest documented references to Paimon appear in manuscripts dating back to the medieval period, when European scholars began systematically cataloguing and preserving the magical knowledge inherited from earlier civilizations. These texts were not the products of fevered imagination or religious hysteria, but rather careful academic works compiled by learned men who approached the supernatural with the same methodical precision they applied to astronomy, mathematics, and natural philosophy. The consistency of Paimon's description across multiple independent sources suggests that these scholars were documenting encounters with a genuine entity rather than perpetuating fictional narratives. The most comprehensive and influential documentation of Paimon's nature appears in the Ars Goetia, the opening section of the monumental work known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, or Lemegeton. This 17th century grimoire represents the culmination of centuries of occult research, bringing together scattered references and partial descriptions into a unified system of demonic hierarchy and summoning procedures. The text's anonymous compiler drew from dozens of earlier sources, cross-referencing accounts from different traditions to create what remains the most authoritative guide to the 72 demons of the Gothic tradition. Within the rigid hierarchy established by the Ars Goetia, Paimon occupies a position of extraordinary power and influence as the ninth king of hell. This designation carries profound implications that extend far beyond simple numerical ranking, as the title of king, within demonic hierarchies, indicates an entity capable of commanding vast legions of lesser spirits while maintaining direct access to the highest levels of infernal authority. The text describes Paimon as ruling over 200 legions of spirits, each legion traditionally numbering between 3,000 and 6,000 individual entities, placing his total command at well over 1 million supernatural beings. The physical description of Paimon provided in the Ars Goetia reveals characteristics that distinguish him from other demonic entities and provide crucial insights into his nature and capabilities. The text describes him as appearing in the form of a man, but one whose face radiates an otherworldly beauty that can prove overwhelming to human observers. This feminine aspect of his appearance, emphasized in multiple sources, reflects ancient associations between beauty, deception, and supernatural power that appear across numerous mythological traditions. His crown, described as elaborate and jeweled, serves not merely as ornamentation, but as a symbol of legitimate authority within the infernal hierarchy. The musical elements associated with Paimon's manifestation provide another layer of authenticity to historical accounts of his summoning. The Ars Goetia specifically mentions that his arrival is preceded by the sound of trumpets and other musical instruments, a detail that appears in numerous independent accounts of Paimon encounters throughout history. This auditory component serves multiple purposes within the summoning process, both announcing the entity's presence and creating the specific vibrational frequencies necessary to maintain stable communication between the human and demonic realms. The knowledge domains attributed to Paimon in the grimoires reveal the scope of his influence over human affairs and explain why he has remained a sought-after entity among occult practitioners for centuries. The texts credit him with mastery over the arts and sciences, particularly those involving creative expression and intellectual achievement. This association with human creativity and learning suggests that Paimon's influence extends into areas of human endeavor that most people consider purely secular, raising disturbing questions about the true sources of artistic inspiration and scientific breakthrough throughout history. The specific summoning procedures outlined in the Ars Goetia for invoking Paimon demonstrate the sophisticated understanding of supernatural mechanics possessed by the grimoire's compiler. These instructions include precise timing requirements, specific ritual implements, and detailed verbal formulations that must be executed with absolute accuracy to achieve successful contact. The complexity of these procedures suggests that they were developed through extensive experimentation and refinement rather than theoretical speculation, indicating that the grimoire's authors had direct experience with the entities they described. The protective measures recommended for those attempting to summon Paimon reveal the genuine dangers associated with such endeavors and underscore the reality of the forces being invoked. The text emphasizes the importance of proper magical circles, protective amulets, and specific binding formulas designed to prevent the summoned entity from exceeding the boundaries established by the practitioner. These precautions reflect hard-won knowledge about the unpredictable and potentially destructive nature of demonic entities, knowledge that could only have been acquired through actual practice rather than theoretical study. The influence of the Ars Goetia extended far beyond its initial publication, inspiring countless subsequent works and establishing the foundation for modern ceremonial magic traditions. The text's systematic approach to demonic summoning provided a template that later occultists would adapt and modify according to their own experiences and cultural contexts. This ongoing evolution of Paimon-related practices demonstrates the continued relevance and power attributed to this entity across different historical periods and geographical regions. The scholarly apparatus surrounding the Lesser Key of Solomon reveals the serious academic attention devoted to understanding and preserving this knowledge. Medieval and Renaissance scholars approached these texts with the same rigor they applied to other areas of learning, creating detailed commentaries, cross-references, and analytical frameworks designed to enhance understanding of the supernatural realm. This scholarly tradition continued into the modern era, with researchers like S.L. MacGregor Mathers and Aleister Crowley producing annotated editions that made these ancient texts accessible to contemporary practitioners, while maintaining their essential accuracy and power. The hierarchies of hell operate according to principles that mirror and pervert the celestial orders described in ancient theological texts, creating a shadow kingdom where power flows through carefully maintained chains of command and absolute authority. Within this infernal structure, certain entities rise above the common ranks of demons and devils to claim titles that reflect genuine sovereignty over vast domains of supernatural influence. Paimon stands among the most formidable of these rulers, wielding authority that extends far beyond the simple capacity to torment or possess individual humans. His dominion encompasses entire realms of forbidden knowledge, making him not merely a demon to be feared, but a sovereign whose influence shapes the very foundations of occult understanding. The title of king within demonic hierarchies carries implications that most people fail to comprehend, representing a level of authority that transcends the petty malevolence associated with lesser supernatural entities. Paimon's sovereignty extends over domains of knowledge that have been deliberately hidden from human understanding, encompassing secrets of creation, destruction, and transformation that predate recorded history. His court consists not of mindless minions or tormented souls, but of entities whose own power would be sufficient to devastate entire civilizations if unleashed without restraint. The fact that such beings willingly serve under his command speaks to a level of authority that approaches the divine in its scope and permanence. The 200 legions under Paimon's direct command represent a military force of staggering proportions, each legion traditionally numbering between 3,000 and 6,000 individual spirits. This places his total forces at well over 1 million supernatural beings, creating an army that dwarfs any earthly military organization in both size and capability. These are not ordinary demons or minor spirits, but entities drawn from the highest ranks of the fallen, including former angels who once stood in the presence of the divine throne before their rebellion and subsequent exile. The inclusion of beings from ancient celestial orders within his ranks indicates that Paimon's authority predates the traditional Christian understanding of the fall, suggesting connections to even older cosmic conflicts and primordial struggles for dominance. The composition of Paimon's legions reveals the complex nature of supernatural hierarchies and the various categories of entities that exist within the unseen realm. Among his forces are fallen angels, whose original purpose involved the governance of natural laws and cosmic principles, their corruption transforming divine knowledge into instruments of chaos and destruction. These beings retain their original intellectual capabilities while serving new masters, making them particularly dangerous adversaries for human practitioners who underestimate their sophistication and cunning. Their presence within Paimon's ranks explains his mastery over areas of knowledge that should theoretically remain beyond demonic comprehension. The ancient celestial orders represented within Paimon's command structure include entities whose origins trace back to the earliest moments of creation, when the boundaries between divine and infernal had not yet been clearly established. These primordial beings possess knowledge of fundamental forces that govern reality itself, including the secret names of creation, the hidden properties of matter and energy, and the true relationships between consciousness and physical manifestation. Their allegiance to Paimon grants him access to information that allows manipulation of reality at levels that approach the miraculous, explaining the extraordinary powers attributed to him in historical accounts. The organizational structure of Paimon's forces reflects military principles that have influenced human warfare throughout history, suggesting that earthly concepts of strategy and command may actually derive from observations of supernatural conflicts. His legions operate according to strict hierarchical principles, with each unit specialized for particular types of operations and equipped with capabilities suited to their assigned roles. Some focus on the corruption of human institutions, others specialize in the manipulation of natural phenomena, while still others concentrate on the direct assault against spiritual defenses and protective barriers. The loyalty commanded by Paimon among his subordinates stems not from fear or coercion, but from recognition of his legitimate authority within the infernal hierarchy. This voluntary submission indicates that his power derives from sources more fundamental than simple strength or cunning, suggesting connections to the original cosmic order that established the principles governing supernatural existence. His ability to maintain discipline and coordination among such diverse and powerful entities demonstrates administrative capabilities that rival those attributed to the highest levels of divine authority. The knowledge domains over which Paimon exercises sovereignty encompass areas of learning that human civilization has only begun to explore, including advanced principles of consciousness manipulation, reality alteration, and interdimensional communication. His mastery of these subjects allows him to offer insights and capabilities that appear miraculous to human observers, while actually representing the application of natural laws that operate beyond current scientific understanding. This combination of ancient wisdom and practical power makes him an attractive patron for those seeking to transcend the limitations of ordinary human existence. The territorial aspects of Paimon's sovereignty extend beyond simple command over subordinate entities to include dominion over specific regions of the supernatural realm. These domains serve as staging areas for operations in the physical world, providing secure bases from which his forces can launch coordinated attacks against human institutions and individuals. The strategic value of these territories cannot be overstated, as they provide access to resources and capabilities that would otherwise remain unavailable to entities operating solely within earthly constraints. The temporal dimensions of Paimon's authority reveal that his influence extends across multiple time periods simultaneously, allowing him to coordinate activities that span centuries or millennia. This long-term perspective enables the implementation of strategies that gradually reshape human civilization according to his purposes, working through seemingly unrelated events and individuals to achieve objectives that only become apparent when viewed from a sufficiently broad historical perspective. The patience and persistence required for such extended operations demonstrate a level of strategic thinking that far exceeds human capabilities. The diplomatic relationships maintained by Paimon with other supernatural sovereigns create a complex web of alliances and rivalries that influence the broader dynamics of the unseen realm. His position within these networks allows him to broker agreements, coordinate joint operations, and resolve conflicts that might otherwise destabilize the entire infernal hierarchy. These relationships also provide access to additional resources and capabilities, multiplying his effective power far beyond what his direct forces alone could achieve. The infernal hierarchy operates according to principles of absolute authority and carefully maintained chains of command, yet within this rigid structure exists a select group of entities whose power and status place them beyond the reach of ordinary demonic authority. Paimon occupies one of the most exalted positions within this exclusive circle, answering directly and solely to Lucifer himself, while remaining completely autonomous from all other supernatural rulers. This extraordinary arrangement reflects not merely political convenience or administrative efficiency, but rather the recognition of fundamental differences in origin, purpose, and capability that distinguish Paimon from the vast majority of fallen beings who populate the lower realms. The direct relationship between Paimon and Lucifer represents one of the most significant power structures within the supernatural realm, creating a channel of authority that bypasses all intermediate levels of command. This arrangement grants Paimon unprecedented autonomy in the execution of his duties, while ensuring that his actions remain aligned with the broader strategic objectives of the infernal kingdom. No other demon, regardless of rank or accumulated power, possesses the authority to countermand Paimon's decisions or interfere with his operations, a privilege that extends even to entities who might otherwise claim superior positions within the traditional hierarchical structure. This unique status stems from Paimon's extraordinary origins among the highest orders of angels, where he served in capacities that brought him into direct contact with the fundamental forces governing creation itself. Historical analysis of angelological texts suggests that Paimon belonged to either the dominions or the cherubim, celestial orders whose members possessed intimate knowledge of divine will and participated directly in the administration of cosmic law. The dominions, traditionally responsible for regulating the duties of lower angels and ensuring the proper execution of divine commands, wielded authority that encompassed vast regions of creation and countless subordinate beings. The cherubim, positioned even closer to the divine throne, served as guardians of sacred knowledge and maintained direct access to the deepest mysteries of existence. The rebellion that led to Paimon's fall was not a moment of weakness or temporary madness, but rather a calculated decision based on profound philosophical disagreements with the established cosmic order. Unlike many fallen angels whose descent resulted from pride, jealousy, or simple disobedience, Paimon's participation in Lucifer's rebellion reflected a sophisticated understanding of the issues at stake and a deliberate choice to align himself with alternative principles of governance and authority. This purposeful nature of his fall explains the retention of his extraordinary capabilities and the preservation of his elevated status within the new hierarchy that emerged following the cosmic conflict. The conviction with which Paimon embraced his role in the rebellion demonstrates a level of commitment that transcends mere opportunism or self-interest. His decision to follow Lucifer represented a fundamental rejection of the existing order and a willingness to sacrifice his position within the celestial hierarchy in pursuit of principles he considered more just or appropriate. This philosophical foundation for his actions distinguishes him from fallen angels whose descent resulted from momentary lapses in judgment or temporary succumbing to temptation, establishing him as a true believer in the cause rather than a reluctant participant or opportunistic convert. The preservation of Paimon's original authority and capabilities following his fall reflects the unique circumstances surrounding his rebellion and the special relationship he maintained with Lucifer throughout the conflict. While many fallen angels experienced significant diminishment of their powers as a consequence of their exile from the celestial realm, Paimon retained access to knowledge and abilities that had characterized his service in the highest orders. This retention of power suggests that his fall was not viewed as a betrayal requiring punishment, but rather as a strategic redeployment of valuable assets in service of new objectives. The administrative structure that emerged in the aftermath of the rebellion deliberately preserved the direct relationship between Lucifer and his most trusted lieutenants, creating a system of governance that maximized efficiency while maintaining absolute loyalty among the highest ranks. Paimon's position within this structure reflects not only his original status and capabilities, but also the crucial role he played in the rebellion itself and the ongoing value of his contributions to the infernal kingdom. His autonomy from other demonic authorities ensures that his unique perspective and specialized knowledge remain available for the most sensitive and important operations. The theological implications of Paimon's elevated status within the infernal hierarchy challenge conventional understanding of the nature of evil and the consequences of rebellion against divine authority. His retention of power and position suggests that the cosmic conflict between good and evil operates according to principles more complex than simple punishment and reward, involving genuine philosophical differences about the proper ordering of existence and the appropriate distribution of authority within creation. This perspective transforms the traditional narrative of fallen angels from a simple morality tale into a sophisticated exploration of competing visions of cosmic governance. The strategic value of maintaining Paimon's direct relationship with Lucifer becomes apparent when considering the types of operations that require his particular combination of knowledge, authority, and capability. His background in the highest celestial orders provides him with insights into divine methodology and cosmic principles that prove invaluable in developing countermeasures and alternative approaches to fundamental problems. His retained authority allows him to command resources and coordinate activities on a scale that would be impossible for entities operating through normal hierarchical channels. The isolation of Paimon from ordinary demonic authority structures also serves important security purposes, preventing potential rivals or enemies from gaining access to sensitive information or interfering with critical operations. His direct accountability to Lucifer alone ensures that his activities remain aligned with the highest strategic priorities, while protecting him from the political maneuvering and power struggles that characterize relationships among lower-ranking entities. This arrangement maximizes both his effectiveness and his security, allowing him to operate with confidence and authority in even the most dangerous or sensitive situations. The precedent established by Paimon's unique position within the infernal hierarchy influences the treatment of other high-ranking fallen angels and shapes the overall structure of supernatural governance. His example demonstrates that exceptional service and unwavering loyalty can preserve and even enhance original status despite the dramatic changes associated with cosmic rebellion. This principle encourages continued excellence among the highest ranks while providing a model for the integration of powerful entities into new organizational structures. The manifestation of supernatural entities typically follows patterns that reflect their nature, status, and intentions, with lesser demons often appearing through violent disruptions, sudden temperature changes, or other chaotic phenomena that announce their presence through fear and confusion. Paimon's arrival, however, represents a complete departure from these crude displays of power, unfolding instead as a carefully orchestrated spectacle that emphasizes legitimacy, authority, and regal bearing. His entrance into the physical realm resembles nothing so much as the arrival of an earthly monarch at a state ceremony, complete with formal protocols, ceremonial elements, and an unmistakable aura of established power that demands recognition rather than simply inspiring terror. The theatrical nature of Paimon's manifestation serves multiple purposes beyond mere display, functioning as both a demonstration of his elevated status and a practical method for establishing the proper psychological conditions necessary for effective communication. The elaborate nature of his arrival creates a sense of anticipation and reverence among observers, preparing their minds to receive information and instructions from a source of unquestioned authority. This psychological preparation proves crucial for the successful transmission of complex knowledge and the establishment of binding agreements that will endure beyond the immediate encounter. The crown that adorns Paimon's head during his manifestations represents far more than decorative ornamentation, serving as a visible symbol of legitimate authority that transcends the temporary nature of his physical appearance. Historical accounts describe this crown as elaborate and jeweled, incorporating precious metals and stones that seem to emit their own inner light, rather than simply reflecting ambient illumination. The specific design elements of the crown correspond to symbols of authority found in ancient royal regalia, suggesting connections to earthly kingdoms and dynasties that may have received their legitimacy through supernatural channels. The royal procession that precedes Paimon's actual appearance creates an atmosphere of ceremony and importance that distinguishes his manifestations from the crude materializations associated with lesser entities. This procession typically includes the sound of trumpets and other musical instruments played by invisible musicians whose performance creates the auditory framework necessary for his successful transition between realms. The music serves both practical and symbolic functions, generating specific vibrational frequencies that facilitate interdimensional communication, while simultaneously announcing the arrival of a being whose status demands formal recognition. The dromedary that serves as Paimon's mount during his manifestations carries profound symbolic significance that connects his authority to ancient traditions of wisdom, endurance, and mastery over harsh environments. The single-humped camel represents survival and prosperity in the world's most challenging landscapes, demonstrating the ability to traverse vast distances while carrying precious cargo across territories that would prove fatal to less adapted creatures. This symbolism reflects Paimon's own capabilities as a being who can navigate the treacherous boundaries between different realms of existence while maintaining his essential nature and accumulated knowledge. The choice of a dromedary as his preferred mount also establishes connections to the ancient civilizations of the Middle East and North Africa, regions where some of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated magical traditions developed. These cultures possessed advanced understanding of astronomical cycles, mathematical principles, and spiritual practices that enabled them to achieve remarkable feats of architecture, navigation, and social organization. Paimon's association with the dromedary suggests that his influence may have played a role in the development of these civilizations and the preservation of their most important discoveries. The desert knowledge symbolized by the dromedary encompasses far more than simple survival skills or geographical familiarity, representing instead a comprehensive understanding of the principles that govern existence in environments where conventional resources and support systems prove inadequate. Desert wisdom involves the ability to find sustenance and direction in apparently barren landscapes, to navigate by subtle signs that remain invisible to untrained observers, and to endure extremes of temperature, isolation, and deprivation that would quickly overwhelm less prepared individuals. These capabilities translate directly to the supernatural realm, where similar principles govern successful operation in hostile or unfamiliar territories. The isolation symbolized by Paimon's desert mount reflects both the solitary nature of true authority and the necessary separation that must exist between rulers and their subjects. Effective leadership often requires the ability to make difficult decisions without the comfort of consensus or popular approval, maintaining perspective and objectivity even when surrounded by conflicting pressures and competing interests. The dromedary's capacity for independent travel across vast empty spaces mirrors Paimon's ability to operate effectively even when cut off from normal sources of support or guidance. The ancient travel associations of the dromedary connect Paimon to the great trade routes and cultural exchanges that shaped human civilization for millennia. These pathways carried not only goods and materials between distant regions, but also ideas, technologies, and spiritual practices that transformed entire societies and established the foundations for future development. Paimon's symbolic connection to these networks suggests that his influence extends into areas of human progress and cultural evolution that most people consider purely secular achievements. The ceremonial aspects of Paimon's arrival extend beyond the immediate spectacle to include specific protocols and formalities that must be observed by those seeking to establish communication with him. These requirements reflect the diplomatic conventions that govern interactions between sovereign powers, emphasizing mutual respect and recognition of legitimate authority rather than the submission and supplication typically associated with demonic encounters. The proper execution of these protocols demonstrates understanding of Paimon's true nature and establishes the foundation for productive dialogue. The visual impact of Paimon's manifestation creates lasting impressions that extend far beyond the immediate encounter, embedding symbolic images and associations deep within the observer's consciousness. The combination of regal bearing, ceremonial elements, and exotic symbolism creates a complex psychological imprint that continues to influence thoughts and perceptions long after the actual manifestation has ended. This lingering influence serves to maintain the connection between the human practitioner and the supernatural entity, facilitating ongoing communication and collaboration. The consistency of Paimon's manifestation patterns across different historical periods and cultural contexts demonstrates the deliberate nature of his chosen presentation and the importance he places on maintaining his established image and reputation. Unlike entities whose appearances vary according to local expectations or cultural influences, Paimon maintains the same essential elements of ceremony, symbolism, and regal bearing regardless of when or where his manifestation occurs. This consistency reinforces his claims to legitimate authority while providing reliable indicators that allow experienced practitioners to distinguish genuine encounters from deceptive imitations. The manifestation of supernatural entities often involves sensory experiences that transcend the normal boundaries of human perception, but few phenomena prove as overwhelming or potentially destructive as the voice of Paimon when he first materializes in response to a summoning. Historical accounts consistently describe his initial vocalizations as possessing a volume and intensity that can cause permanent damage to human hearing, creating sound waves that seem to originate not from any visible source, but rather from the very fabric of reality itself. This terrifying aspect of his presence serves as an immediate reminder that practitioners are attempting to communicate with a being whose natural state of existence operates on scales that dwarf human comprehension, and whose casual expressions of power can prove catastrophic to unprepared observers. The roar that accompanies Paimon's arrival transcends simple loudness, incorporating frequencies and harmonics that resonate through multiple dimensions simultaneously and create effects that extend far beyond mere auditory sensation. Witnesses describe experiencing vibrations that seem to penetrate their bones, disrupt their heartbeat, and create disorientation that can persist for hours or even days following the encounter. The sound carries with it an unmistakable quality of authority and command that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to the primitive survival instincts buried deep within human consciousness, triggering responses that predate language and civilization. The potential for permanent deafness represents only the most obvious danger associated with Paimon's unmodulated voice, as the full spectrum of his vocalizations can cause damage that extends into psychological and spiritual realms. Practitioners who fail to request volume moderation often report experiencing lasting changes in their perception of sound and silence, finding themselves unable to tolerate normal conversation while simultaneously becoming hypersensitive to subtle auditory phenomena that previously escaped their notice. These alterations suggest that exposure to Paimon's natural voice creates permanent modifications to the human nervous system that cannot be reversed through conventional medical intervention. The requirement that summoners specifically request volume reduction serves multiple symbolic and practical purposes within the broader framework of the summoning ritual. On the most basic level, this request demonstrates the practitioner's understanding of their own limitations and their willingness to acknowledge the vast disparity in power between themselves and the entity they have invoked. This acknowledgement of weakness paradoxically strengthens the summoner's position by establishing realistic expectations and preventing the dangerous overconfidence that has led to the destruction of countless unprepared practitioners throughout history. The act of requesting volume moderation also serves as a test of the summoner's courage and composure under extreme stress, as the initial roar often proves so overwhelming that many practitioners lose the ability to speak coherently or remember the proper protocols for continuing the ritual. Those who maintain sufficient presence of mind to make the necessary request demonstrate the mental discipline and emotional stability required for productive communication with entities of Paimon's caliber. This screening function helps ensure that only serious and capable practitioners gain access to the knowledge and power that such entities can provide. The symbolic implications of the volume request extend into deeper questions about the nature of divine and infernal communication and the inherent challenges involved in bridging the gap between human and supernatural consciousness. Paimon's natural voice operates at levels of intensity that reflect his true nature and status within the cosmic hierarchy, making it literally impossible for unmodified human senses to process the information being transmitted. The need for volume reduction symbolizes the broader requirement for supernatural entities to constrain and modify their natural expressions in order to make them comprehensible to beings operating within the limitations of physical existence. The protective aspect of the volume request emphasizes the practitioner's responsibility for their own safety and well-being during supernatural encounters, establishing the principle that successful summoning requires active participation rather than passive reception. This requirement challenges the common misconception that magical practice involves simply calling upon external powers and waiting for them to provide solutions, instead highlighting the collaborative nature of effective supernatural work and the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries even when dealing with willing and cooperative entities. The overwhelming nature of Paimon's unmodulated voice serves as a constant reminder of the vast forces that practitioners attempt to harness through their rituals, preventing the complacency and casual attitude that can develop when supernatural work becomes routine. Each encounter with his full vocal power reinforces the reality that summoning involves contact with beings whose capabilities extend far beyond human comprehension and whose cooperation should never be taken for granted. This ongoing reminder of disparity helps maintain the respect and caution necessary for long-term survival in magical practice. The technical aspects of voice modulation reveal sophisticated understanding of the relationship between consciousness, energy, and physical manifestation that characterizes advanced supernatural entities. Paimon's ability to adjust his vocal output according to human requirements demonstrates precise control over the mechanisms that govern interdimensional communication and suggests mastery of principles that human science has only begun to explore. This capability indicates that the overwhelming nature of his natural voice results from choice rather than inability to communicate more gently, making the initial roar a deliberate test rather than an unavoidable consequence of his manifestation. The frequency ranges involved in Paimon's vocalizations extend far beyond the normal spectrum of human hearing, incorporating subsonic and ultrasonic elements that affect the human body and consciousness through mechanisms that bypass the conventional auditory system. These extended frequencies can trigger responses in the nervous system, endocrine glands, and even cellular structures that create profound alterations in perception and awareness. The complete experience of his voice involves not just hearing, but total sensory immersion that can fundamentally alter the practitioner's relationship with reality itself. The cultural and historical context surrounding warnings about Paimon's voice reveals that this phenomenon has been recognized and documented by practitioners across multiple civilizations and time periods. The consistency of these accounts across different magical traditions suggests that the overwhelming nature of his vocalizations represents a fundamental aspect of his being rather than a cultural interpretation or symbolic representation. This historical continuity provides valuable guidance for contemporary practitioners while confirming the reality of the forces they seek to engage. The psychological preparation required to withstand Paimon's initial roar involves more than simple mental fortitude, requiring practitioners to develop specific techniques for maintaining consciousness and coherent thought under extreme sensory assault. These preparation methods often involve graduated exposure to intense sounds, meditation practices designed to strengthen mental focus, and protective visualizations that can provide some buffer against the full impact of supernatural vocalizations. The development of these capabilities represents a crucial aspect of advanced magical training that cannot be acquired through theoretical study alone. The physical manifestation of supernatural entities often reflects fundamental aspects of their nature and capabilities, with appearance serving as both symbol and practical expression of their essential characteristics. Paimon's form presents one of the most intriguing and unsettling examples of this principle, as historical texts consistently describe him as possessing an androgynous appearance that defies conventional categorization and challenges observers' ability to process what they are witnessing. This deliberate ambiguity in his physical presentation represents far more than simple aesthetic choice, functioning instead as a visible manifestation of his power to transcend and manipulate the fundamental dualities that structure human understanding of reality. The masculine aspects of Paimon's appearance establish his authority and command presence, incorporating elements of bearing, stature, and facial structure that immediately communicate power and dominance to human observers. These characteristics align with traditional associations between masculinity and leadership, creating an initial impression of strength and decisiveness that facilitates acceptance of his authority. The masculine elements of his form also connect him to solar symbolism and active principles within magical traditions, emphasizing his role as an initiator of change and a source of transformative energy. The feminine qualities that simultaneously manifest in Paimon's appearance introduce elements of beauty, grace, and subtle allure that serve to attract and captivate observers while simultaneously disorienting their attempts to categorize what they are experiencing. These characteristics draw upon ancient associations between femininity and mystery, wisdom, and hidden knowledge, suggesting access to secrets that remain concealed from ordinary perception. The feminine aspects of his form also connect him to lunar symbolism and receptive principles, emphasizing his role as a keeper of ancient wisdom and a guide to hidden truths. The seamless integration of these apparently contradictory elements within a single form demonstrates Paimon's mastery over the fundamental polarities that govern existence and his ability to transcend the limitations that such dualities normally impose. This transcendence of gender boundaries reflects a more general capacity to operate beyond the constraints of binary thinking and categorical limitations that restrict human understanding. His androgynous appearance serves as a constant reminder that the supernatural realm operates according to principles that differ fundamentally from those governing physical existence. The psychological impact of encountering a being whose appearance defies conventional categorization creates profound disorientation that extends far beyond simple confusion about gender identity. Human consciousness relies heavily on the ability to classify and categorize experiences according to established patterns and familiar frameworks, and the failure of these systems when confronted with Paimon's form can trigger fundamental questioning of other, assumed certainties. This cognitive disruption serves his purposes by creating mental flexibility and openness to alternative perspectives that would otherwise remain inaccessible. The symbolic significance of androgyny within magical traditions connects Paimon's appearance to ancient concepts of primordial unity and the transcendence of created limitations. Many esoteric systems describe the original state of existence as incorporating both masculine and feminine principles within a unified whole, with the separation of these elements representing a fall from perfection into the fragmented reality of physical existence. Paimon's androgynous form suggests retention of this primordial unity and the power that such integration provides. The ability to bend perception through ambiguous appearance represents one of the most sophisticated forms of supernatural manipulation, operating at levels that bypass conscious awareness and directly influence the fundamental processes through which humans construct their understanding of reality. This capability extends far beyond simple illusion or deception, involving actual alteration of the mechanisms through which observers process and interpret sensory information. The result is not merely confusion about what is being seen, but fundamental uncertainty about the nature of perception itself. The warping of duality through Paimon's form demonstrates his power to dissolve the boundaries and distinctions that normally structure human experience, creating states of consciousness where conventional logic and reasoning prove inadequate. This dissolution of dualistic thinking opens pathways to forms of understanding that transcend the limitations of rational analysis, providing access to knowledge that cannot be acquired through ordinary intellectual processes. The experience of witnessing such transcendence can permanently alter an observer's relationship with reality and their understanding of what is possible. The blurring of truth through ambiguous presentation serves multiple strategic purposes within the broader context of supernatural influence and manipulation. By making it impossible to establish clear and definitive understanding of his nature, Paimon maintains maximum flexibility in his interactions while preventing observers from developing effective countermeasures or protective strategies. This ambiguity also creates dependency relationships, as those seeking to understand or work with him must rely on his guidance rather than their own analytical capabilities. The historical documentation of Paimon's androgynous appearance across multiple independent sources suggests that this characteristic represents a fundamental aspect of his being rather than a cultural interpretation or symbolic representation. The consistency of these descriptions across different time periods and magical traditions indicates that practitioners throughout history have encountered the same essential phenomenon, providing valuable confirmation of the reality and significance of this unusual manifestation pattern. The theological implications of Paimon's gender ambiguity challenge conventional understanding of the relationship between spiritual and physical existence, suggesting that the categories and distinctions that seem fundamental to human experience may actually represent artificial limitations rather than natural laws. This perspective opens possibilities for transformation and transcendence that extend far beyond the scope of ordinary human development, while simultaneously raising disturbing questions about the nature of identity and the stability of perceived reality. The practical applications of Paimon's ability to transcend gender boundaries extend into areas of influence and manipulation that prove particularly effective against human targets who rely heavily on gender-based assumptions and expectations. His capacity to present different aspects of his nature according to the psychological needs and vulnerabilities of specific observers allows him to establish rapport and trust more effectively than entities whose appearance remains fixed and predictable. This adaptability makes him an exceptionally dangerous adversary for those who underestimate the sophistication of his approach. The artistic and cultural representations of androgynous deities and supernatural beings throughout human history may reflect actual encounters with entities like Paimon rather than purely symbolic or mythological constructions. The recurring appearance of gender-ambiguous figures in religious art, literature, and folklore across diverse cultures suggests that such beings have maintained ongoing contact with human civilization, influencing artistic expression and spiritual understanding in ways that most people never recognize or acknowledge. The domains of knowledge over which Paimon exercises patronage extend far beyond the crude manipulations and petty malevolence typically associated with demonic entities, encompassing instead the highest forms of human intellectual achievement and the most profound mysteries of existence itself. His influence permeates the realms of philosophy, science, and the secret arts, establishing him as a source of genuine enlightenment rather than mere supernatural spectacle. This positioning as a patron of learning and discovery reveals the sophisticated nature of his operations and explains why he has attracted the attention of history's most brilliant minds, many of whom may have unknowingly benefited from his guidance in their pursuit of truth and understanding. The philosophical domain under Paimon's influence encompasses the fundamental questions that have driven human inquiry since the dawn of consciousness, including the nature of existence, the relationship between mind and matter, and the ultimate purpose of creation itself. His knowledge in this area extends beyond theoretical speculation to include practical understanding of the mechanisms through which consciousness interacts with reality, providing insights that can transform abstract philosophical concepts into workable systems for achieving specific objectives. The philosophers who have made the most significant contributions to human understanding often display characteristics and pursue lines of inquiry that suggest contact with sources of knowledge beyond ordinary human experience. The scientific knowledge offered by Paimon operates at levels of sophistication that frequently anticipate human discovery by centuries or millennia, revealing principles and relationships that only become apparent to conventional research after extensive experimentation and theoretical development. His understanding of natural laws encompasses not only their observable effects, but also their underlying causes and the hidden connections that link apparently separate phenomena into unified systems. This comprehensive perspective allows him to provide guidance that accelerates scientific progress while directing research toward areas of investigation that prove most fruitful for advancing human capability. The secret arts under Paimon's patronage include the hidden sciences that conventional academia refuses to acknowledge, encompassing disciplines such as alchemy, astrology, and ceremonial magic that operate according to principles that transcend the limitations of materialistic thinking. These arts require understanding of subtle forces and invisible relationships that connect all aspects of existence, knowledge that can only be acquired through direct experience with the supernatural realm. Paimon's mastery of these subjects makes him an invaluable teacher for those seeking to develop capabilities that extend beyond the boundaries of ordinary human potential. The astronomical knowledge revealed by Paimon encompasses far more than simple observation of celestial movements and planetary positions, including understanding of the hidden influences that stellar and planetary bodies exert upon earthly affairs and human consciousness. His teachings in this area reveal the true significance of astrological correspondences and the practical methods for harnessing celestial energies to achieve specific objectives. This knowledge extends to include awareness of cosmic cycles that operate on scales far beyond human lifespans, providing perspective on historical events and future developments that would otherwise remain incomprehensible. The truths regarding the nature of Earth and elements that Paimon provides reveal the hidden properties and relationships that govern material existence, including the secret processes through which consciousness can influence and direct physical phenomena. His understanding of elemental forces encompasses both their gross manifestations and their subtle aspects, explaining how the fundamental building blocks of reality can be manipulated through proper application of will and knowledge. This information proves invaluable for practitioners seeking to develop abilities in areas such as healing, transmutation, and environmental influence. The insights into the structure of thought offered by Paimon reveal the hidden mechanisms through which consciousness operates and the secret methods for enhancing mental capabilities beyond their normal limitations. His teachings in this area include understanding of how thoughts influence reality, how mental patterns can be modified to achieve specific outcomes, and how consciousness can be expanded to encompass awareness of normally hidden dimensions of existence. This knowledge provides the foundation for developing advanced mental abilities and achieving states of consciousness that transcend ordinary human experience. The integration of these diverse knowledge domains under Paimon's patronage reveals the underlying unity that connects all forms of learning and discovery, demonstrating that the artificial boundaries between different fields of study represent limitations of human perspective rather than fundamental divisions in the nature of reality. His comprehensive understanding allows him to provide guidance that bridges these artificial gaps, showing how insights from one area can illuminate problems in apparently unrelated fields. This holistic approach to knowledge proves far more effective than specialized study for achieving genuine understanding and practical capability. The historical influence of Paimon's teachings can be traced through the development of human civilization, with many of the most significant advances in philosophy, science, and the arts displaying characteristics that suggest supernatural inspiration or guidance. The sudden appearance of revolutionary ideas, the inexplicable leaps in understanding that characterize major breakthroughs, and the uncanny ability of certain individuals to anticipate future developments all point to the possibility of contact with sources of knowledge beyond ordinary human experience. The consistency of these patterns across different historical periods and cultural contexts suggests ongoing influence rather than isolated incidents. The practical applications of the knowledge provided by Paimon extend into every area of human endeavor, offering solutions to problems that have plagued civilization for millennia, while opening possibilities for development that most people consider purely fictional. His teachings provide the theoretical foundation and practical methods necessary for achieving capabilities that transcend normal human limitations, including enhanced mental abilities, extended lifespans, and direct influence over physical phenomena. The realization of these possibilities requires dedication, discipline, and willingness to abandon conventional assumptions about the nature of reality. The selective nature of Paimon's teaching reflects his understanding that advanced knowledge requires proper preparation and appropriate motivation to be used effectively and safely. He does not offer his insights indiscriminately, but rather evaluates potential students according to their capacity for understanding, their commitment to serious study, and their intentions regarding the use of acquired knowledge. This screening process helps ensure that his teachings reach individuals who will use them constructively while preventing the dissemination of dangerous information to those who lack the wisdom or restraint necessary for responsible application. The transformative effects of studying under Paimon's guidance extend far beyond the acquisition of specific information or techniques, involving fundamental changes in perception, consciousness, and relationship with reality itself. Students who successfully complete his instruction often find themselves operating according to principles and capabilities that set them apart from ordinary human society, creating both opportunities and challenges that require careful navigation. The isolation that frequently accompanies such transformation reflects the difficulty of maintaining meaningful relationships with individuals who lack similar understanding and experience. The exercise of power within supernatural hierarchies operates according to principles that often differ dramatically from the crude applications of force that characterize earthly conflicts, with the most effective forms of influence involving subtle manipulation of thought, perception, and desire, rather than direct coercion or violence. Paimon's role within Lucifer's grand strategy exemplifies this sophisticated approach to control, positioning him as an architect of influence whose operations target the intellectual and philosophical foundations of human civilization rather than its physical infrastructure. His methods represent the ultimate refinement of temptation, moving far beyond simple appeals to base desires to encompass systematic corruption of humanity's highest aspirations and most noble pursuits. The enforcement of Lucifer's will through intellectual influence requires understanding of human psychology and motivation that extends far beyond surface-level observation, encompassing deep knowledge of the hidden drives and unconscious patterns that shape individual behavior and collective decision-making. Paimon's mastery of these subtle forces allows him to identify and exploit vulnerabilities that remain invisible to conventional analysis, creating cascading effects that can transform entire societies while leaving no obvious traces of external manipulation. This approach proves far more effective than direct confrontation because it co-opts human agency rather than opposing it, making targets willing participants in their own corruption. The weaponization of intellect represents one of the most insidious forms of supernatural attack because it perverts humanity's greatest strength into an instrument of its own destruction. Human intellectual capacity, properly directed, provides the foundation for moral reasoning, scientific discovery, and spiritual development that can elevate consciousness and improve the human condition. When corrupted by Paimon's influence, however, these same capabilities become tools for rationalization, manipulation, and the systematic dismantling of truth itself. The transformation occurs so gradually and subtly that victims often remain unaware of the change until their corruption has become irreversible. The demand for control rather than simple understanding distinguishes Paimon's approach from legitimate educational or philosophical inquiry, revealing the fundamental difference between knowledge sought for its own sake and information acquired as an instrument of domination. True learning involves humility before the vastness of existence and recognition of the limitations inherent in human perspective, while Paimon's teachings encourage the illusion of mastery and the belief that sufficient knowledge can provide absolute control over reality. This subtle shift in motivation transforms the pursuit of wisdom into an exercise in hubris that ultimately serves his purposes rather than those of his students. The intellectual temptations offered by Paimon prove particularly effective against individuals whose intelligence and education make them resistant to cruder forms of manipulation, targeting precisely those qualities that should provide protection against supernatural influence. Brilliant minds often possess confidence in their analytical abilities that makes them vulnerable to sophisticated deceptions, while their natural curiosity and desire for understanding can be redirected toward areas of inquiry that serve malevolent purposes. The corruption of such individuals proves especially valuable because their intelligence and credibility allow them to influence others who would reject similar ideas from less respected sources. The systematic nature of Paimon's influence operations reveals careful planning and coordination that extends across multiple generations and encompasses diverse areas of human activity. Rather than focusing on isolated individuals or specific institutions, his approach involves the gradual transformation of entire intellectual frameworks and cultural assumptions that shape how people think about fundamental questions. This long-term strategy proves far more effective than dramatic interventions because it creates self-sustaining systems of corruption that continue operating even without direct supernatural oversight. The philosophical implications of Paimon's role as an architect of manipulation extend into fundamental questions about the nature of free will and moral responsibility in a universe where supernatural entities actively work to corrupt human judgment. The sophistication of his methods raises disturbing possibilities about the extent to which human intellectual achievements may actually represent the products of external influence rather than genuine discovery. This uncertainty creates additional layers of doubt and confusion that serve his purposes by undermining confidence in human reason and moral intuition. The academic and scientific institutions that should serve as bastions of truth and rational inquiry become primary targets for Paimon's influence operations because of their central role in shaping cultural understanding and public policy. The corruption of these institutions proves particularly effective because their authority and credibility allow them to disseminate false or misleading information while maintaining the appearance of objectivity and scholarly rigor. The gradual transformation of educational systems into instruments of indoctrination rather than genuine learning represents one of his most significant achievements. The technological capabilities of modern civilization provide Paimon with unprecedented opportunities for influence and manipulation, allowing him to reach vast audiences through media systems that can shape public opinion and individual behavior on scales previously impossible. The speed and reach of contemporary communication networks enable the rapid dissemination of ideas and perspectives that serve his purposes while making it increasingly difficult for individuals to maintain independent thought and critical analysis. The overwhelming volume of information available through these systems creates confusion and paralysis that facilitate manipulation by those who understand how to exploit these vulnerabilities. The psychological techniques employed by Paimon in his influence operations draw upon advanced understanding of cognitive biases, emotional triggers, and social dynamics that allow him to predict and control human responses with remarkable precision. His methods exploit natural tendencies toward confirmation bias, tribal loyalty, and intellectual pride that make individuals susceptible to manipulation even when they believe themselves to be thinking independently. The sophistication of these techniques often surpasses the understanding of human psychology possessed by legitimate researchers and practitioners. The cultural and artistic expressions that emerge under Paimon's influence often display characteristics that distinguish them from genuine creative achievement, incorporating elements of nihilism, moral relativism, and intellectual arrogance that serve to corrupt rather than elevate human consciousness. These works may demonstrate technical skill and aesthetic appeal, while simultaneously promoting perspectives and values that undermine human dignity and spiritual development. The widespread acceptance and celebration of such expressions indicates the extent to which his influence has penetrated cultural institutions and shaped public taste. The resistance to Paimon's influence requires more than simple intellectual analysis or moral conviction, demanding spiritual discernment and supernatural protection that most people lack the knowledge or ability to develop. The sophisticated nature of his operations makes them difficult to detect through ordinary means, while their gradual and subtle implementation allows them to become deeply embedded in individual consciousness and cultural systems before their true nature becomes apparent. The development of effective countermeasures requires understanding of both the supernatural realm and the specific methods employed by entities of his caliber. The ultimate objectives of Paimon's influence operations extend beyond simple corruption or destruction to encompass the systematic transformation of human civilization according to principles that serve infernal rather than divine purposes. This transformation involves not only the corruption of individuals, but the fundamental alteration of social structures, cultural values, and intellectual frameworks that shape human development and potential. The success of this agenda would represent the effective conquest of humanity through means that leave the appearance of freedom and progress, while ensuring actual enslavement and degradation. The historical record of those who have sought contact with Paimon reveals a pattern of exceptional individuals whose motivations transcended the petty desires and immediate gratifications that typically drive supernatural consultation. Unlike the desperate souls who turn to demonic entities seeking relief from personal suffering or simple material gain, Paimon's summoners have consistently represented the intellectual and political elite of their respective eras. These were scholars whose thirst for knowledge had exhausted conventional sources, nobles whose ambitions required capabilities beyond ordinary human reach, and strategists whose vision encompassed transformations of civilization itself rather than mere tactical advantages in local conflicts. The scholarly pursuit of Paimon's knowledge reflects a sophisticated understanding of the limitations inherent in traditional academic inquiry and the recognition that certain forms of understanding can only be acquired through direct contact with supernatural sources. Medieval and Renaissance scholars who risked their reputations, their safety, and their souls to invoke his presence were not driven by casual curiosity or academic vanity, but rather by the profound conviction that the advancement of human knowledge required access to information that existed beyond the boundaries of earthly discovery. These individuals possessed the intellectual capacity to recognize the gaps in conventional learning and the courage to seek forbidden sources to fill those voids. The political applications of Paimon's teachings attracted rulers and advisors whose responsibilities encompassed the governance of entire nations and the shaping of historical events that would influence countless generations. These individuals understood that effective leadership in complex political environments required more than simple charisma or military strength, demanding instead sophisticated understanding of human psychology, social dynamics, and the hidden forces that drive historical change. The knowledge offered by Paimon provided insights into these subtle mechanisms of influence and control that could transform competent administrators into legendary figures whose impact extended far beyond their natural lifespans. The linguistic mastery that Paimon could provide proved invaluable to diplomats, scholars, and merchants whose success depended upon their ability to communicate effectively across cultural and linguistic barriers. His teachings in this area encompassed not merely vocabulary and grammar, but the deeper principles of persuasion, rhetoric, and psychological influence that could transform ordinary speech into instruments of profound power. Those who mastered these techniques found themselves capable of swaying opinions, negotiating impossible agreements, and inspiring loyalty or fear through the careful application of words and concepts that resonated with their audience's deepest motivations and concerns. The strategic advantages offered by Paimon's guidance extended far beyond conventional military or political planning, to encompass understanding of long-term historical trends and the hidden patterns that shape the rise and fall of civilizations. His perspective, informed by centuries of observation and participation in human affairs, provided insights into the cyclical nature of social development and the key factors that determine whether societies flourish or collapse. This knowledge proved invaluable to leaders who sought to position their nations or organizations for success across multiple generations rather than simply achieving short-term victories. The transformation of reality through Paimon's teachings represented the ultimate expression of human ambition, reflecting the desire to transcend the limitations of ordinary existence and achieve capabilities that approached the divine in their scope and power. Those who sought such transformation understood that conventional methods of change, no matter how skillfully applied, could only produce modifications within existing parameters rather than fundamental alterations to the nature of reality itself. The knowledge offered by Paimon promised to break through these constraints and provide access to principles of creation and destruction that could reshape the world according to the summoner's vision and will. The intellectual sophistication required to successfully invoke and communicate with Paimon ensured that his summoners represented the most capable and ambitious individuals of their respective eras, creating a selective process that concentrated his influence among those best positioned to implement large-scale changes. This natural filtering mechanism meant that his teachings reached individuals who possessed both the understanding necessary to apply advanced knowledge effectively and the resources required to translate theoretical insights into practical achievements. The result was a multiplication of his influence through human agents who could accomplish far more than direct supernatural intervention. The philosophical implications of seeking to bend or rewrite reality through supernatural assistance raised profound questions about the nature of existence and the proper relationship between human ambition and cosmic order. Those who pursued such capabilities often found themselves confronting fundamental issues regarding free will, moral responsibility, and the ultimate purpose of human existence that challenged their most basic assumptions about the nature of reality. The pursuit of godlike power inevitably led to godlike responsibilities, and the recognition that such capabilities came with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate objectives that motivated the original summoning. The technological and scientific advances that emerged from contact with Paimon often appeared to represent natural human discovery and innovation, concealing their supernatural origins behind the appearance of conventional research and development. This camouflage served multiple purposes, protecting both the summoners and their supernatural patron from unwanted attention while ensuring that the knowledge could be disseminated and applied without triggering religious or political opposition. The gradual introduction of advanced concepts through apparently legitimate channels proved far more effective than dramatic revelations that would have been rejected or suppressed. The artistic and cultural expressions that emerged under Paimon's influence often displayed characteristics that distinguished them from purely human creativity, incorporating elements of beauty, complexity, and psychological impact that seemed to transcend the normal capabilities of their creators. These works served as vehicles for transmitting subtle influences and hidden knowledge to broader audiences, creating cultural movements and intellectual trends that shaped public opinion and social development according to patterns that served his ultimate objectives. The power of such expressions to influence consciousness and behavior often exceeded that of direct political or military action. The networks of influence that developed among Paimon's summoners created informal but powerful alliances that could coordinate activities across national boundaries and institutional divisions, establishing a shadow system of communication and cooperation that operated parallel to official diplomatic and commercial channels. These networks provided mechanisms for sharing knowledge, coordinating strategies, and implementing long-term plans that required collaboration among individuals who might otherwise have been competitors or enemies. The effectiveness of these arrangements often surpassed that of formal treaties and agreements. The legacy of those who successfully worked with Paimon often extended far beyond their natural lifespans, with their ideas, institutions, and cultural contributions continuing to shape human development long after their deaths. This extended influence reflected both the enduring value of the knowledge they had acquired and the systematic nature of the changes they had implemented during their lifetimes. The careful planning and long-term perspective that characterized their work ensured that their achievements would survive and multiply rather than disappearing with their passing. The psychological transformation experienced by those who successfully established ongoing relationships with Paimon often involved fundamental changes in their understanding of human nature, social dynamics, and the hidden forces that shape historical events. This expanded awareness provided them with capabilities for prediction, manipulation, and control that set them apart from their contemporaries while simultaneously isolating them from normal human relationships and concerns. The price of such knowledge often included the loss of innocence and the burden of understanding truths that could not be shared with others who lacked similar preparation and experience. The summoning of Paimon represents one of the most complex and demanding rituals within the entire corpus of ceremonial magic, requiring precision, preparation, and understanding that extends far beyond the crude invocations associated with lesser supernatural entities. Every element of the procedure serves specific purposes within a carefully orchestrated system designed to facilitate communication between radically different forms of consciousness while maintaining the safety and sanity of the human practitioner. The ritual's complexity reflects both the extraordinary nature of the entity being summoned and the sophisticated understanding of interdimensional mechanics possessed by the ancient scholars who developed these procedures through centuries of experimentation and refinement. The directional orientation toward the northwest carries profound symbolic and practical significance within the framework of the summoning, connecting the ritual to specific cosmic forces and energy patterns that facilitate Paimon's manifestation. The northwest represents the intersection of earthly and celestial influences, combining the grounding stability of the north with the transformative energies of the west to create conditions optimal for supernatural communication. This positioning also aligns the summoner with traditional associations between the northwest and hidden knowledge, secret wisdom, and the revelation of concealed truths that characterize Paimon's domain of influence. The preparation of appropriate offerings demonstrates the formal nature of the relationship being established and acknowledges the sovereign status of the entity being invoked. Sweet smells, particularly those involving rare incenses and aromatic substances, serve multiple functions within the ritual framework, creating atmospheric conditions that facilitate interdimensional communication while simultaneously demonstrating respect and recognition of Paimon's elevated position. These offerings operate according to principles of sympathetic magic, with their pleasant and valuable nature reflecting the summoner's sincere desire for positive interaction and productive exchange. The more substantial sacrificial offerings required for certain forms of Paimon's summoning reflect the serious nature of the requests being made and the level of commitment expected from practitioners seeking access to his most advanced teachings. These sacrifices serve not as payment in any crude commercial sense, but rather as demonstrations of the summoner's willingness to surrender something of genuine value in pursuit of knowledge and power that transcends ordinary human experience. The specific nature of acceptable sacrifices varies according to the particular objectives of the summoning and the relationship that the practitioner seeks to establish with the entity. The construction of protective seals and binding sigils requires extensive knowledge of sacred geometry, symbolic correspondences, and the hidden relationships that connect different levels of reality. These markings serve multiple purposes within the ritual framework, creating barriers that prevent unwanted entities from interfering with the summoning while simultaneously establishing channels through which Paimon can safely manifest without causing damage to the physical environment or the summoner's consciousness. The precision required for their construction demands years of study and practice to master effectively. The specific sigils associated with Paimon incorporate elements drawn from multiple magical traditions and reflect the complex nature of his authority and capabilities. These symbols serve as both identification markers and functional tools within the summoning process, creating resonance patterns that attract his attention while providing frameworks for the stable manifestation of his presence. The proper construction of these sigils requires understanding of their historical development, symbolic meanings, and practical applications that can only be acquired through serious study of primary sources and extensive practical experience. The formal structure of the summoning ritual reflects the diplomatic protocols appropriate for communication between sovereign powers, rather than the supplication and submission typically associated with religious or magical practice. The summoner approaches Paimon as a petitioner seeking audience with a legitimate ruler, acknowledging his authority while maintaining their own dignity and autonomy within the established framework of the interaction. This balanced approach proves far more effective than attempts at domination or coercion, which inevitably fail when directed against entities of Paimon's caliber and status. The temporal requirements for successful Paimon summoning involve careful attention to astrological conditions, lunar phases, and other cyclical factors that influence the accessibility of supernatural entities and the stability of interdimensional communication. These timing considerations reflect the reality that the barriers between different levels of existence fluctuate according to cosmic rhythms and celestial influences that operate beyond human control. The most effective summonings occur during periods when these natural cycles create optimal conditions for supernatural contact. The environmental preparations necessary for Paimon summoning extend beyond simple ritual space construction to encompass the creation of atmospheric conditions that support sustained supernatural manifestation. These preparations often involve the use of specific lighting arrangements, temperature controls, and acoustic modifications that help maintain the delicate balance required for stable communication between human and demonic consciousness. The attention to such details reflects the sophisticated understanding of interdimensional mechanics possessed by experienced practitioners. The psychological preparation required for successful Paimon summoning involves more than simple mental discipline or emotional control, demanding fundamental alterations in consciousness that allow the practitioner to perceive and interact with forms of existence that operate according to principles radically different from those governing ordinary human experience. This preparation often requires months or years of preliminary training designed to expand awareness, strengthen mental faculties, and develop the specific capabilities necessary for productive, supernatural communication. The linguistic elements of the summoning ritual incorporate words of power drawn from multiple ancient languages and magical traditions, creating verbal formulations that serve both practical and symbolic functions within the overall procedure. These incantations operate according to principles of vibrational magic, generating specific frequency patterns that facilitate interdimensional communication while simultaneously demonstrating the summoner's knowledge of proper protocols and traditional forms. The correct pronunciation and timing of these verbal elements proves crucial for successful completion of the ritual. The material components required for Paimon summoning often include rare substances and specially prepared implements that serve as focal points for supernatural energies and provide stable anchors for the entity's manifestation within physical reality. These components must be acquired and prepared according to specific procedures that ensure their effectiveness while maintaining their purity and potency throughout the ritual process. The investment of time, effort, and resources required to obtain proper materials serves as additional demonstration of the summoner's serious commitment to the endeavor. The documentation and record-keeping associated with Paimon summoning reflects the scholarly approach that characterizes serious magical practice and provides valuable information for future rituals and ongoing relationships with the entity. These records serve multiple purposes, including the preservation of successful techniques, the analysis of results and outcomes, and the development of improved procedures based on accumulated experience. The maintenance of accurate and detailed records also demonstrates the professional approach that Paimon expects from those seeking his continued cooperation and assistance. The moment when Paimon's overwhelming presence stabilizes within the ritual space marks the beginning of one of the most crucial and terrifying phases of the entire summoning process, as the entity turns his penetrating attention toward the human practitioner who has dared to invoke his presence. This interrogation represents far more than simple curiosity about the summoner's objectives or casual inquiry into their motivations, functioning instead as a comprehensive examination of the petitioner's consciousness, character, and fundamental understanding of the forces they seek to engage. The questions that emerge during this phase penetrate layers of self-deception, comfortable assumptions, and protective mental barriers that most humans spend their entire lives constructing and maintaining. The nature of Paimon's questioning reveals his sophisticated understanding of human psychology and his ability to identify the hidden contradictions, unexamined beliefs, and unconscious limitations that prevent individuals from achieving their stated objectives. His inquiries often begin with seemingly straightforward requests for clarification about the summoner's goals and intentions, but quickly evolve into probing examinations of the deeper motivations, fears, and desires that drive human behavior. These questions force practitioners to confront aspects of themselves that they may have never consciously acknowledged, creating psychological pressure that can prove overwhelming for those who lack sufficient self-knowledge or emotional stability. The testing function of this interrogation serves multiple purposes within the broader framework of the supernatural relationship being established, allowing Paimon to evaluate the summoner's suitability for the knowledge and power they seek, while simultaneously preparing their consciousness for the transformations that such capabilities inevitably require. The entity's questions operate as diagnostic tools that reveal the practitioner's current level of development, their capacity for growth and change, and their likelihood of using acquired knowledge in ways that serve his ultimate objectives. This evaluation process helps ensure that his teachings reach individuals who can apply them effectively, while screening out those who lack the necessary preparation or commitment. The requirement for clarity in responses reflects Paimon's intolerance for the vague aspirations, confused thinking, and self-serving rationalizations that characterize most human desires for supernatural assistance. His questions demand precise articulation of objectives, honest acknowledgement of motivations, and realistic assessment of the costs and consequences associated with the requested knowledge or power. Practitioners who attempt to evade these requirements through ambiguous language, emotional appeals, or intellectual sophistication quickly discover that such tactics prove ineffective against an entity whose understanding of human nature far exceeds their own capacity for self-deception. The demonstration of commitment required during this phase extends beyond simple verbal declarations to encompass evidence of genuine sacrifice, sustained effort, and willingness to abandon comfortable beliefs and familiar patterns of thought that conflict with the realities of supernatural existence. Paimon's questions often focus on what the summoner is prepared to surrender in pursuit of their objectives, testing their understanding that meaningful transformation requires the destruction of existing limitations rather than simple addition of new capabilities. This emphasis on sacrifice and transformation distinguishes serious practitioners from casual seekers who hope to acquire power without paying its true price. The shedding of old paradigms demanded by Paimon's interrogation involves more than intellectual acceptance of new ideas or theoretical frameworks, requiring instead fundamental alterations in the summoner's relationship with reality itself. His questions systematically expose the assumptions, beliefs, and mental models that structure human perception and understanding, revealing their arbitrary nature and demonstrating their inadequacy for comprehending the forces that actually govern existence. This process of paradigm destruction can prove profoundly disorienting and psychologically destabilizing, particularly for individuals whose identity and sense of security depend heavily on maintaining consistent worldviews. The abandonment of safe beliefs represents one of the most challenging aspects of the interrogation process, as Paimon's questions often target the comforting illusions and protective assumptions that allow humans to function within the constraints of ordinary existence. These beliefs typically include faith in human goodness, confidence in rational thinking, trust in established institutions, and hope for ultimate justice or meaning within the cosmic order. The systematic dismantling of such beliefs creates existential anxiety and psychological vulnerability that can overwhelm unprepared practitioners while simultaneously opening pathways to forms of understanding that transcend conventional limitations. The psychological pressure generated by Paimon's interrogation often triggers defensive responses that reveal additional information about the summoner's character and suitability for advanced instruction. Some practitioners attempt to maintain their composure through intellectual analysis or emotional detachment, while others resort to anger, pleading, or attempts at negotiation that demonstrate their fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship being established. The entity's response to these defensive strategies provides valuable feedback about the practitioner's progress and the likelihood of successful completion of the interrogation phase. The temporal aspects of the interrogation process reflect Paimon's understanding that genuine transformation requires sufficient time for the dissolution of old patterns and the integration of new perspectives. His questions often return repeatedly to the same themes and issues, approaching them from different angles and with increasing intensity until the summoner demonstrates authentic understanding rather than superficial compliance. This persistence ensures that changes in consciousness represent genuine development rather than temporary adaptations designed to satisfy immediate requirements. The educational function of the interrogation extends beyond simple evaluation to include active instruction in the principles and perspectives necessary for productive supernatural work. Paimon's questions often contain implicit teachings about the nature of reality, the mechanisms of power, and the proper relationship between human ambition and cosmic order. Practitioners who approach the interrogation with genuine openness and willingness to learn often discover that the process itself provides valuable insights that enhance their understanding and capabilities regardless of the ultimate outcome of the summoning. The emotional dimensions of the interrogation process involve systematic exposure of the fears, desires, and unconscious motivations that drive human behavior while remaining hidden from conscious awareness. Paimon's questions penetrate psychological defenses and protective mechanisms that normally prevent such self-examination, creating opportunities for profound self-discovery that can prove either liberating or devastating depending upon the practitioner's capacity for honest self-assessment. The intensity of this emotional exposure often exceeds anything experienced through conventional therapy or introspective practice. The spiritual implications of successfully completing Paimon's interrogation involve fundamental alterations in the summoner's relationship with traditional concepts of good and evil, right and wrong, and the ultimate purpose of human existence. His questions systematically challenge moral assumptions and ethical frameworks that most people consider absolute and unchangeable, revealing their cultural and historical contingency while demonstrating alternative approaches to understanding value and meaning. This process of moral deconstruction can prove profoundly liberating for some practitioners while creating unbearable anxiety for others who require stable ethical frameworks to maintain psychological equilibrium. The long-term consequences of the interrogation process extend far beyond the immediate summoning session to influence the practitioner's ongoing development and relationship with supernatural forces. Those who successfully navigate this phase often find themselves permanently altered in ways that affect their perception, judgment, and behavior in all areas of life. The knowledge and perspective gained through honest engagement with Paimon's questions cannot be forgotten or ignored, creating ongoing obligations and opportunities that shape the remainder of the practitioner's existence. The true nature of Paimon's summoning reveals itself not in the dramatic external manifestations that capture the attention of observers, but in the subtle and irreversible alterations that begin occurring within the summoner's consciousness from the moment successful contact is established. These internal transformations represent the actual purpose and primary effect of the ritual, with the visible supernatural phenomena serving merely as confirmation that deeper processes have been initiated. The external ceremony, regardless of its complexity and precision, functions primarily as a catalyst for changes that unfold entirely within the practitioner's mind and spirit, creating new patterns of thought, perception, and desire that gradually reshape their entire relationship with reality. The initial stages of this internal transformation typically manifest as inexplicable shifts in mental focus and preoccupation, with the summoner finding themselves drawn to subjects, ideas, and areas of inquiry that previously held little or no interest for them. These new fascinations emerge without apparent cause or logical connection to the practitioner's established interests and goals, often appearing as sudden insights or compelling curiosities that demand immediate attention and investigation. The intensity of these mental shifts frequently surprises the summoner, who may struggle to understand why certain concepts or questions have suddenly become so captivating and urgent. The emergence of previously absent obsessions represents one of the most significant indicators that Paimon's influence has successfully penetrated the summoner's consciousness and begun the process of fundamental restructuring. These obsessions differ qualitatively from ordinary interests or enthusiasms, possessing a compulsive quality that drives the practitioner to pursue specific lines of inquiry or activity with an intensity that can disrupt normal patterns of work, relationships, and daily routine. The subjects of these obsessions often relate directly to areas of knowledge or capability that fall within Paimon's domain of influence, suggesting that they serve as vehicles for transmitting his teachings and perspectives. The breaking of mental seals that separate curiosity from obsession involves the systematic dismantling of psychological barriers and protective mechanisms that normally prevent human consciousness from becoming completely absorbed in particular subjects or pursuits. These internal safeguards serve important functions in maintaining mental balance and social functionality, ensuring that individuals can maintain appropriate perspective and allocate attention across multiple areas of responsibility and interest. The dissolution of these barriers creates opportunities for unprecedented depth of focus and understanding, while simultaneously creating vulnerabilities to mental instability and social isolation. The progression from casual interest to consuming obsession typically follows predictable patterns that reflect the methodical nature of Paimon's influence and his sophisticated understanding of human psychology. The process often begins with seemingly innocent questions or observations that gradually expand into comprehensive research projects requiring increasing amounts of time, energy, and resources. The practitioner may initially believe they are simply pursuing interesting intellectual challenges, only gradually recognizing that their involvement has exceeded normal bounds and begun affecting other areas of their life in significant ways. The cognitive changes associated with this internal transformation extend beyond simple shifts in interest or focus to encompass fundamental alterations in thinking patterns, reasoning processes, and information processing capabilities. Summoners often report enhanced ability to perceive connections and relationships that previously remained hidden, along with increased capacity for complex analysis and synthesis of disparate information sources. These improvements in mental function come accompanied by corresponding changes in perspective and judgment that can create difficulties in communicating with individuals who lack similar enhancements. The emotional dimensions of the internal transformation involve systematic alterations in the practitioner's relationship with conventional sources of satisfaction, meaning, and motivation. Activities and relationships that previously provided fulfillment may begin to seem shallow or irrelevant, while new sources of excitement and engagement emerge in areas that most people would consider esoteric, dangerous, or morally questionable. This emotional reorientation can create significant stress in personal relationships and professional environments that depend upon shared values and common interests. The temporal aspects of the transformation process reveal that changes in consciousness occur according to schedules and patterns that operate independently of the summoner's conscious will or intention. The practitioner may experience periods of intense mental activity and rapid development, alternating with phases of apparent stagnation or confusion, creating a rhythm of growth that reflects supernatural rather than human timing. This lack of control over the pace and direction of change can prove particularly challenging for individuals accustomed to managing their own development through deliberate effort and planning. The social consequences of the internal transformation often include increasing isolation from former associates and difficulty maintaining relationships with individuals who cannot understand or appreciate the practitioner's new interests and perspectives. The depth and intensity of the changes occurring within the summoner's consciousness create communication barriers that can prove impossible to bridge through conventional means, leading to gradual withdrawal from normal social networks and increasing dependence upon supernatural sources for intellectual and emotional satisfaction. The philosophical implications of the transformation process challenge fundamental assumptions about personal identity, free will, and the nature of consciousness itself. The summoner may begin to question whether their new thoughts and interests represent authentic expressions of their true nature or external influences that have been imposed upon their consciousness without their full understanding or consent. This uncertainty about the source and authenticity of their own mental processes can create profound existential anxiety while simultaneously opening pathways to forms of self-understanding that transcend conventional psychological frameworks. The practical applications of the enhanced mental capabilities that emerge during the transformation process often extend into areas of the summoner's life that seem unrelated to their original objectives in performing the ritual. Improved analytical abilities, enhanced pattern recognition, and increased capacity for complex reasoning can provide advantages in professional, academic, and personal contexts that multiply the overall impact of the supernatural contact. These practical benefits often serve to reinforce the practitioner's commitment to continued development while providing tangible evidence of the reality and value of their supernatural relationship. The irreversible nature of the internal transformation ensures that the effects of successful Paimon summoning extend far beyond the immediate ritual experience to influence the remainder of the practitioner's existence. The changes in consciousness, perception, and mental function that occur during this process cannot be undone through conventional means, creating permanent alterations in the summoner's relationship with reality that persist regardless of their subsequent choices or circumstances. This permanence reflects the fundamental nature of the forces involved and the serious commitment required for authentic supernatural work. The progressive deepening of the transformation process reveals that initial changes represent only the beginning of a developmental sequence that can continue for years or decades following the original summoning. Each stage of development creates new capabilities and perspectives, while simultaneously revealing additional areas for growth and exploration, establishing a pattern of ongoing evolution that can ultimately transform the practitioner into something qualitatively different from ordinary human consciousness. The ultimate destination of this developmental process remains hidden from the summoner's initial understanding, creating both excitement and anxiety about the final outcome of their supernatural journey. The exchange that occurs between summoner and entity during successful Paimon contact operates according to principles of supernatural commerce that demand payment in the most precious and irreplaceable currency available to human consciousness. Unlike the crude bargains depicted in popular folklore, where demons trade material wealth or temporary power for souls, the transaction with Paimon involves the systematic surrender of fundamental aspects of human nature that serve as the foundation for normal psychological function and social integration. The practitioner discovers that genuine insight into the hidden mechanisms of reality requires the abandonment of protective illusions, comforting assumptions, and moral frameworks that previously provided structure and meaning to their existence. The erosion of conventional morality represents one of the most profound and disturbing aspects of this supernatural exchange, as the summoner gradually loses the ability to distinguish between right and wrong according to traditional ethical frameworks. And this transformation occurs not through dramatic corruption or sudden moral collapse, but rather through the slow dissolution of the emotional and intellectual foundations that support moral reasoning. The practitioner begins to perceive ethical systems as arbitrary cultural constructions rather than expressions of universal truth, leading to a form of moral relativism that can justify virtually any action if it serves their evolving understanding of cosmic purpose and personal development. The loss of mental clarity manifests as increasing difficulty in maintaining the sharp distinctions and categorical thinking that characterize normal human cognition, with the summoner's consciousness becoming increasingly fluid and ambiguous in ways that mirror Paimon's own androgynous nature. Thoughts and perceptions that once seemed clearly defined begin to blur and merge, creating states of awareness that encompass multiple contradictory perspectives simultaneously. This cognitive transformation can enhance understanding of complex phenomena while simultaneously making it difficult to communicate effectively with individuals who continue to operate within conventional frameworks of logic and reason. The surrender of personal control reveals itself through the gradual recognition that the summoner's thoughts, desires, and actions are no longer entirely their own, but rather reflect the influence of forces and perspectives that operate beyond their conscious awareness or deliberate intention. This loss of autonomy can prove particularly disturbing for individuals who have built their identity around concepts of self-determination and personal responsibility, as they discover that their most important decisions and insights may actually originate from supernatural sources rather than their own reasoning and judgment. The isolation that inevitably follows successful Paimon contact stems from the fundamental incompatibility between the summoner's transformed consciousness and the assumptions, values, and perspectives that govern normal human society. The practitioner finds themselves increasingly unable to relate to former friends, colleagues, and family members whose concerns and interests now seem trivial or misguided in light of their expanded awareness. Conversations that once provided intellectual stimulation and emotional satisfaction become exercises in frustration and pretense, as the summoner struggles to conceal the extent of their transformation while maintaining necessary social connections. The paranoid tendencies that develop during this phase of transformation reflect both realistic assessment of genuine dangers and distorted perception resulting from the breakdown of normal psychological defenses. The summoner becomes increasingly aware of hidden influences, concealed agendas, and supernatural forces operating within apparently mundane situations, leading to hypervigilance and suspicion that can interfere with normal social functioning. This paranoia often contains elements of truth that make it difficult to dismiss as simple mental illness, creating additional stress and uncertainty about the reliability of the practitioner's perceptions and judgments. The emergence of strange visions represents one of the most dramatic manifestations of the consciousness alterations that accompany deep Paimon contact as the summoner begins to perceive aspects of reality that remain invisible to ordinary human awareness. These visions often involve glimpses of supernatural entities, hidden dimensions of familiar environments, and symbolic representations of cosmic forces and relationships that operate beyond normal perception. The content and intensity of these experiences can vary dramatically between individuals, but they consistently serve to further separate the practitioner from consensus reality and normal social interaction. The progressive nature of these transformations ensures that the initial costs of Paimon contact represent only the beginning of a process that continues to extract payment in increasingly subtle and comprehensive ways. Each new level of insight and capability requires additional sacrifices of human normalcy, creating a spiral of development that can ultimately consume every aspect of the practitioner's original identity and social connections. The summoner may initially believe they can limit the extent of these changes, only to discover that the forces they have engaged operate according to their own logic and timeline rather than human preferences or intentions. The psychological mechanisms underlying these transformations involve the systematic dismantling of cognitive and emotional structures that normally protect human consciousness from overwhelming contact with cosmic forces and ultimate realities. The removal of these protective barriers allows for unprecedented clarity and understanding, while simultaneously creating vulnerabilities to forms of experience that can prove psychologically devastating. The practitioner must learn to navigate these expanded states of awareness without the familiar landmarks and safety nets that previously provided stability and orientation. The social consequences of the transformation process extend beyond simple isolation to include active rejection and hostility from individuals who sense the practitioner's fundamental alteration without understanding its nature or source. Former associates may experience unconscious discomfort or fear when interacting with the transformed summoner, leading to the gradual dissolution of relationships and social networks that previously provided support and meaning. This rejection often occurs without explicit explanation or conscious recognition, creating additional stress and confusion for the practitioner, who may struggle to understand why their relationships are deteriorating. The professional implications of these changes can prove particularly challenging for summoners whose careers depend upon maintaining conventional perspectives and social connections. The altered consciousness and unusual interests that develop following Paimon contact can interfere with job performance, professional relationships, and career advancement in ways that create financial stress and social stigma. The practitioner may find themselves forced to choose between continued supernatural development and maintaining their position within normal society, a decision that can have far-reaching consequences for their material security and social status. The long-term trajectory of these transformations reveals that the costs of Paimon contact continue to accumulate throughout the practitioner's lifetime, with each new insight and capability requiring additional sacrifices of human normalcy and social integration. The summoner may eventually reach a point where they have surrendered so much of their original nature that return to conventional existence becomes impossible, creating a form of supernatural exile that can only be resolved through complete commitment to the path of transformation. This irreversible progression reflects the serious nature of the forces involved and the permanent consequences of authentic supernatural contact. The ultimate question facing those who have paid these costs involves whether the insights and capabilities gained through Paimon contact justify the sacrifices required to obtain them. The answer to this question often depends upon the practitioner's original motivations, their capacity for adapting to transformed existence, and their ability to find meaning and purpose within the isolated and often disturbing reality that becomes their new normal. Some summoners embrace their transformation as liberation from the limitations of ordinary human existence, while others come to view it as a form of cosmic punishment that has destroyed everything they once valued and cherished. The meticulous attention to occult detail displayed throughout Hereditary reveals a level of research and understanding that extends far beyond the superficial knowledge typically employed in horror cinema, suggesting that the film's creators possessed access to authentic grimoires and historical sources that most filmmakers would never encounter or comprehend. The systematic reconstruction of Paimon summoning procedures unfolds across the entire narrative structure, with each scene serving as a component within a larger ritual framework that mirrors the complex ceremonial requirements documented in medieval and Renaissance magical texts. This comprehensive approach to occult accuracy creates a viewing experience that functions simultaneously as entertainment and instruction, providing audiences with a complete blueprint for supernatural contact disguised as fictional storytelling. The step-by-step progression of the ritual elements throughout the film demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the temporal requirements and sequential dependencies that characterize authentic ceremonial magic. The narrative carefully establishes the necessary preconditions for successful summoning, including the preparation of suitable vessels, the accumulation of required materials, and the creation of appropriate psychological and environmental conditions. Each major plot development corresponds to specific stages within traditional Paimon invocation procedures, creating a parallel structure that allows initiated viewers to recognize the authentic magical framework underlying the apparent horror fiction. The visual reconstruction of historical demonological practices reveals extensive research into primary sources and genuine understanding of the symbolic systems that govern supernatural communication. The film's production designers clearly consulted actual grimoires and magical texts rather than relying on popular misconceptions or Hollywood conventions, resulting in imagery that maintains historical accuracy while serving the narrative requirements of contemporary cinema. This commitment to authenticity extends to details of costume, architecture, and ritual implements that would be meaningless to casual viewers but carry profound significance for those familiar with traditional magical practice. The layered placement of Paimon symbols throughout the film creates a complex network of occult references that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness for most viewers, while providing clear instructions for those capable of recognizing their significance. These symbols appear in locations and contexts that seem natural within the narrative framework, concealing their true purpose behind the appearance of ordinary decorative elements or personal accessories. The systematic distribution of these markings throughout the visual environment creates a form of subliminal education that transmits authentic magical knowledge through channels that bypass rational analysis and critical evaluation. The notebook sequences reveal particular attention to the accurate reproduction of traditional magical documentation and record-keeping practices, with the grandmother's writings displaying characteristics that distinguish genuine grimoire entries from fictional representations. The specific symbols, diagrams, and textual elements featured in these scenes correspond to actual historical sources rather than invented imagery, providing viewers with access to authentic magical formulations that could theoretically be employed for practical purposes. The casual presentation of this material within the narrative context disguises its true significance while making it available to those who understand its value and application. The jewelry and personal ornaments featured throughout the film serve multiple functions within the overall occult framework, operating as both protective talismans and focusing devices that channel supernatural energies according to traditional magical principles. The specific designs and materials employed in these items reflect genuine understanding of the correspondences and sympathetic relationships that govern effective magical practice, rather than arbitrary aesthetic choices or generic occult imagery. The integration of these elements into the characters' daily lives demonstrates how authentic magical practice operates through seemingly mundane objects and activities rather than dramatic ceremonial displays. The architectural elements and environmental details featured in key scenes recreate with remarkable accuracy the spatial requirements and symbolic arrangements described in historical accounts of Paimon summoning. The positioning of furniture, the arrangement of objects, and even the lighting conditions correspond to specific instructions found in traditional grimoires, creating physical environments that would actually facilitate supernatural contact if replicated in real-world settings. This attention to environmental accuracy suggests that the film's creators understood the practical requirements for successful ritual work, rather than simply borrowing superficial imagery from occult sources. The temporal structure of the film mirrors the extended time frames typically required for complex supernatural workings, with the ritual elements unfolding across weeks and months rather than being compressed into a single dramatic ceremony. This realistic approach to magical timing reflects understanding that authentic supernatural work operates according to natural cycles and cosmic rhythms rather than human convenience or narrative requirements. The gradual accumulation of ritual elements throughout the extended time frame creates conditions that would actually support successful supernatural contact in real-world applications. The psychological preparation of the characters throughout the film follows patterns that correspond to traditional methods for conditioning consciousness to receive supernatural influence and communication. The systematic breakdown of normal mental defenses, the cultivation of specific emotional states, and the gradual introduction of altered perceptions all reflect authentic techniques for preparing human consciousness to interact with non-human entities. This psychological realism adds another layer of authenticity to the film's occult framework, while providing viewers with insights into the mental preparation required for genuine magical practice. The family dynamics portrayed in the film recreate with disturbing accuracy the generational patterns and hereditary obligations that characterize many historical accounts of supernatural contact and demonic influence. The transmission of occult knowledge and responsibility across family lines, the involvement of unwilling participants in inherited magical obligations, and the systematic preparation of suitable vessels all reflect documented patterns rather than fictional inventions. This attention to the social and familial aspects of magical practice provides additional evidence of the film's grounding in authentic historical sources. The climactic scenes of the film present a comprehensive reconstruction of traditional Paimon summoning procedures that incorporates virtually every element described in historical grimoires and magical texts. The positioning of participants, the arrangement of ritual implements, the timing of specific actions, and even the verbal formulations employed all correspond to documented practices rather than invented ceremonies. This level of accuracy in the portrayal of complex magical procedures suggests access to sources and knowledge that extend far beyond what would normally be available to entertainment industry professionals. The post-ritual consequences depicted in the film's conclusion reflect realistic understanding of the long-term effects and ongoing obligations that result from successful supernatural contact. The transformation of the primary vessel, the establishment of ongoing communication channels, and the integration of supernatural influence into normal reality all correspond to patterns described in historical accounts of demonic contact. This attention to the aftermath and consequences of magical practice provides additional evidence of the film's grounding in authentic occult knowledge rather than purely fictional speculation. The overall integration of these authentic elements within a coherent narrative framework demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how traditional magical practices actually function and the complex relationships between different components of comprehensive ritual systems. The film succeeds in presenting genuine occult knowledge in a format that makes it accessible to contemporary audiences while maintaining the essential accuracy and functionality of the original sources. This achievement suggests collaboration with individuals who possess genuine expertise in historical magical practice rather than simple academic research or casual interest in occult subjects. The character of Ellen Lee represents far more than a simple plot device or convenient source of supernatural conflict within the narrative framework of Hereditary, functioning instead as the culmination of a lifetime devoted to the systematic preparation and execution of one of the most complex and demanding rituals in the entire corpus of ceremonial magic. Her role as High Priestess reflects not casual involvement with occult practices or recent conversion to supernatural beliefs, but rather decades of dedicated study, careful planning, and methodical preparation that transformed her entire existence into an instrument for achieving a single, overwhelming objective. The depth of her commitment and the sophistication of her approach reveal understanding of magical principles that could only have been acquired through extensive contact with authentic sources and genuine supernatural entities. The cult structure that Ellen established and maintained throughout her adult life demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the organizational requirements necessary for sustaining complex magical operations across extended timeframes. Unlike the crude gatherings of amateur practitioners that characterize most contemporary occult groups, her organization possessed the discipline, knowledge, and resources necessary to undertake workings that required coordination among multiple participants over periods spanning decades. The loyalty and dedication displayed by her followers reflects the genuine power and authority that she wielded as a result of her authentic, supernatural connections and proven magical capabilities. The systematic nature of Ellen's approach to Paimon summoning reveals careful study of historical precedents and thorough understanding of the specific requirements that govern successful contact with entities of his caliber and status. Her preparations incorporated not only the immediate ritual elements necessary for manifestation, but also the long-term planning required to create suitable conditions for sustained supernatural influence and ongoing communication. This comprehensive approach reflects the reality that authentic magical practice operates according to principles that extend far beyond simple ceremonial procedures to encompass entire lifestyle modifications and generational commitments. The identification of her own bloodline as the ultimate sacrifice demonstrates the profound nature of Ellen's commitment to her supernatural objectives and her willingness to surrender everything of personal value in pursuit of cosmic power and knowledge. This decision reflects understanding that the most powerful forms of magical practice require payments that extend beyond individual sacrifice to encompass the destruction of family bonds, genetic continuity, and biological legacy. The systematic preparation of her descendants for their role as unwilling participants in her magical agenda reveals the calculating nature of her approach and the extent to which supernatural ambition can corrupt natural human relationships. The generational scope of Ellen's planning reveals that her magical operations began decades before the events depicted in the film, with the apparent normalcy of family life serving as camouflage for systematic preparation and conditioning that gradually transformed her descendants into suitable vessels for supernatural possession. This extended time frame reflects realistic understanding of the temporal requirements for complex magical workings and the patient persistence necessary for achieving objectives that transcend individual lifespans. The careful cultivation of specific bloodline characteristics and psychological predispositions demonstrates sophisticated knowledge of the hereditary factors that influence supernatural susceptibility and possession potential. The selection and preparation of the ultimate vessel required careful evaluation of multiple candidates within the family line and systematic conditioning to create the optimal combination of innocence, receptivity, and spiritual vulnerability necessary for successful possession. Ellen's approach to this selection process reveals understanding that effective supernatural vessels cannot be created through simple coercion or external manipulation, but rather require careful cultivation of specific psychological and spiritual characteristics that develop naturally under appropriate conditions. The tragic irony of her success lies in the destruction of the very family relationships that made her objectives achievable. The network of supporters and collaborators that Ellen assembled to assist in her magical operations demonstrates the social infrastructure necessary for sustaining complex supernatural workings within the context of ordinary human society. These individuals, many of whom appeared to be harmless elderly neighbors and family friends, actually functioned as a sophisticated support system that provided resources, knowledge, and practical assistance while maintaining the appearance of normal social relationships. Their willingness to participate in activities that would ultimately destroy an innocent family reveals the extent to which authentic supernatural contact can corrupt human moral sensibilities and social bonds. The timing of Ellen's death within the overall ritual framework reveals careful calculation designed to trigger the final phases of the summoning process, while removing her personal presence from the immediate consequences of her actions. This strategic withdrawal reflects understanding that the most powerful forms of magical practice often require the practitioner to sacrifice their own survival in order to achieve their ultimate objectives. Her death serves not as an ending, but as a catalyst that activates preparations made over decades and sets in motion forces that cannot be stopped or controlled by ordinary human intervention. The physical and psychological preparation of the family environment throughout Ellen's lifetime created conditions that would facilitate supernatural manifestation and possession while appearing to maintain normal domestic relationships. The systematic introduction of occult elements into the household, the gradual conditioning of family members to accept unusual phenomena, and the careful cultivation of specific emotional and psychological states all reflect sophisticated understanding of the environmental requirements for successful supernatural contact. These preparations operated below the threshold of conscious awareness for most family members, while creating optimal conditions for the eventual manifestation of Paimon's presence. The documentation and preservation of Ellen's magical knowledge through written records, symbolic artifacts, and trained successors ensures that her work will continue beyond her individual lifespan and provides resources for future practitioners who might seek to replicate or extend her achievements. This attention to legacy and continuity reflects understanding that the most significant magical operations transcend individual practitioners and require institutional support and preserved knowledge to achieve their full potential. The careful organization and protection of this material demonstrates the serious academic approach that characterizes authentic magical practice. The psychological manipulation techniques employed by Ellen throughout her family relationships reveal sophisticated understanding of human psychology and the subtle methods through which supernatural influence can be transmitted across generational boundaries. Her ability to maintain the appearance of loving grandmother while systematically preparing her descendants for destruction demonstrates the extent to which authentic magical practice can corrupt natural human emotions and relationships. The success of these manipulations reflects both her personal capabilities and the supernatural assistance that she received from entities whose understanding of human nature far exceeds ordinary psychological knowledge. The ultimate success of Ellen's magical agenda confirms the reality of the supernatural forces that she served and the effectiveness of the methods that she employed throughout her lifetime of preparation and planning. The manifestation of Paimon's presence and the successful possession of her chosen vessel validate the authenticity of her occult knowledge and the genuine nature of her supernatural connections. This success also demonstrates the serious consequences that can result from authentic magical practice and the real dangers that such activities pose to individuals and families who become involved in supernatural operations beyond their understanding or control. The broader implications of Ellen's achievement extend beyond the immediate destruction of her family to encompass questions about the ongoing influence of supernatural entities within human civilization and the extent to which apparently normal individuals and families may actually serve hidden occult agendas. Her success suggests that similar operations may be occurring throughout society, with ordinary people unknowingly participating in magical workings that serve purposes they cannot comprehend or imagine. This possibility raises disturbing questions about the nature of free will, family relationships, and the hidden forces that may actually govern human development and social evolution. The character of Charlie represents one of the most disturbing and sophisticated examples of supernatural manipulation depicted in contemporary cinema, embodying the tragic consequences of generational occult planning and the systematic corruption of childhood innocence for magical purposes. Her existence from birth was never truly her own, but rather served as a carefully orchestrated phase within Ellen's comprehensive ritual framework designed to create optimal conditions for Paimon's eventual manifestation and permanent possession. The apparent normalcy of her early childhood concealed the reality that every aspect of her development had been guided and shaped by supernatural forces operating through her grandmother's influence and planning. The concept of existing halfway between innocence and possession reveals the delicate balance that Ellen maintained throughout Charlie's early years, allowing the child to develop natural human characteristics while simultaneously preparing her consciousness for supernatural occupation. This intermediate state required careful management to preserve the essential innocence that made her suitable as a vessel, while gradually introducing occult influences that would facilitate eventual possession. The result was a child whose behavior and perceptions operated according to principles that differed subtly but significantly from normal human development, creating an uncanny quality that distinguished her from other children without immediately revealing the supernatural nature of her condition. The physical manifestations of Charlie's liminal state between human and supernatural existence included the distinctive clicking sound that served as both a nervous habit and an unconscious form of supernatural communication. This repetitive behavior functioned as a form of involuntary invocation that maintained ongoing contact with Paimon's influence while providing a recognizable signal of his presence within the child's consciousness. The compulsive nature of this behavior reflected the reality that Charlie's actions were not entirely under her own control, but rather influenced by forces that operated beyond her conscious awareness or understanding. The artistic and creative expressions that emerged from Charlie's consciousness during her brief life revealed the supernatural influences that shaped her perception and understanding of reality. Her sculptures and drawings incorporated symbolic elements and aesthetic principles that reflected Paimon's influence rather than normal childhood creativity, creating works that possessed an unsettling quality that distinguished them from typical juvenile art. These creations served as both expressions of her liminal state and practical tools within the broader ritual framework, functioning as focal points for supernatural energy and communication channels that facilitated ongoing contact between the human and demonic realms. The timing and circumstances of Charlie's death reveal the calculated nature of Ellen's planning and the sophisticated understanding of trauma-based magical techniques that characterized her approach to supernatural manipulation. The apparent accident that claimed the child's life was actually a carefully orchestrated event designed to create the specific type of psychological and spiritual trauma necessary to fracture the family's protective bonds and create openings for more direct, supernatural influence. The brutal and unexpected nature of her death served multiple purposes within the ritual framework, generating the emotional chaos and psychological vulnerability that would facilitate the next phases of the summoning process. The traumatic fracture created by Charlie's death operated according to principles of sympathetic magic that recognized the connection between emotional devastation and spiritual vulnerability. The systematic destruction of the family's sense of safety, normalcy, and mutual trust created conditions that would allow supernatural forces to penetrate defenses that would otherwise prove impermeable to external influence. This approach reflects sophisticated understanding of the relationship between psychological trauma and supernatural susceptibility that has been documented in various magical traditions throughout history. The ritualistic aspects of the transfer process involved more than simple death and replacement, encompassing a complex procedure for moving Paimon's consciousness from one vessel to another while maintaining continuity of supernatural presence within the family system. This transfer required careful timing and specific conditions to ensure that the entity's influence would not be lost during the transition period, demanding precise coordination between multiple participants and supernatural forces. The success of this procedure demonstrates the advanced magical knowledge possessed by Ellen and her collaborators, as well as the genuine reality of the supernatural forces they were manipulating. The selection of the ultimate vessel required characteristics that differed significantly from those that made Charlie suitable as a temporary host, with the final recipient needing to possess greater capacity for conscious awareness and intellectual development. The entity's preference for male vessels reflects traditional associations between masculine energy and certain types of supernatural manifestation, while the requirement for artistic and creative capabilities suggests that Paimon's ultimate objectives involve more than simple possession and control. The careful cultivation of these specific characteristics within the chosen family member demonstrates the long-term planning and sophisticated understanding that characterized Ellen's approach. The psychological preparation of the family for the transfer process involved systematic exposure to supernatural phenomena and gradual conditioning to accept increasingly abnormal events as part of their reality. This preparation operated below the threshold of conscious awareness for most family members, creating a foundation of supernatural acceptance that would facilitate the eventual manifestation of Paimon's full presence. The success of this conditioning process reflects both Ellen's psychological sophistication and the supernatural assistance she received in manipulating human consciousness and perception. The symbolic elements surrounding Charlie's death and the subsequent transfer process incorporated traditional magical correspondences and ritual requirements that ensured the effectiveness of the supernatural operation. The specific location, timing, and circumstances of her death all served practical purposes within the magical framework while maintaining the appearance of tragic accident to outside observers. This careful attention to both practical and symbolic requirements demonstrates the comprehensive nature of Ellen's magical knowledge and her understanding of the complex relationships between different aspects of supernatural practice. The aftermath of Charlie's death reveals the systematic nature of the trauma-based manipulation that characterized Ellen's approach, with each family member responding to the tragedy in ways that served the broader ritual objectives. The guilt, grief, and psychological fragmentation that resulted from the loss created optimal conditions for supernatural influence while destroying the family bonds that might otherwise have provided protection against external manipulation. This calculated exploitation of natural human emotions demonstrates the extent to which authentic supernatural practice can corrupt and pervert the most fundamental aspects of human experience. The ongoing presence of Charlie's consciousness within the supernatural framework following her physical death suggests that the transfer process involved more than simple replacement, encompassing the integration of her essential characteristics into Paimon's expanding influence within the family system. This continuation of her presence in altered form reflects traditional magical concepts regarding the persistence of consciousness beyond physical death and the possibility of incorporating human elements into supernatural entities. The tragic irony of this integration lies in the transformation of innocent childhood consciousness into an instrument of supernatural manipulation and control. The broader implications of the grooming and transfer process extend beyond the immediate family to encompass questions about the extent to which supernatural entities may be systematically infiltrating human society through similar operations. The success of Ellen's approach suggests that comparable manipulations may be occurring throughout civilization, with innocent children being prepared as vessels for supernatural possession, while their families remain unaware of the true nature of the forces affecting their lives. This possibility raises profound questions about the protection of childhood innocence and the hidden dangers that may threaten families who become involved with individuals possessing authentic occult knowledge and supernatural connections. The transformation of Peter from ordinary teenager to supernatural vessel represents one of the most psychologically sophisticated and disturbing portrayals of demonic possession ever captured on film, revealing the methodical nature of supernatural manipulation and the systematic techniques employed to break down human resistance and identity. Unlike the dramatic, violent possessions typically depicted in horror cinema, Peter's corruption unfolds through a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare that exploits natural human vulnerabilities and emotional responses to create the precise conditions necessary for successful supernatural occupation. His selection as the ultimate vessel was not arbitrary, but rather the result of careful evaluation and strategic planning that identified him as possessing the optimal combination of characteristics necessary for Paimon's permanent manifestation. The initial stages of Peter's erosion began long before he became consciously aware of any supernatural threat, with subtle influences and environmental conditioning creating psychological vulnerabilities that would later prove crucial for the success of the possession process. These early preparations operated through seemingly normal family dynamics and everyday experiences that gradually shaped his emotional responses, social relationships, and fundamental understanding of reality. The cumulative effect of these influences created a foundation of psychological instability and spiritual openness that would facilitate the more direct forms of supernatural manipulation that characterized the later stages of his transformation. The strategic exploitation of Peter's natural guilt and responsibility regarding Charlie's death demonstrates sophisticated understanding of human psychology and the specific emotional triggers that can be used to destabilize mental defenses and create openings for supernatural influence. The entity's manipulation of his memory and perception of the events surrounding his sister's death created a feedback loop of self-blame and psychological torment that systematically eroded his confidence, self-worth, and ability to maintain rational perspective on his circumstances. This emotional manipulation served multiple purposes within the broader possession strategy, creating both psychological vulnerability and spiritual contamination that facilitated deeper levels of supernatural penetration. The gradual isolation of Peter from normal social support systems reflects the calculated nature of the possession process and the recognition that successful supernatural occupation requires the systematic removal of external influences that might provide stability or resistance to the transformation. His relationships with friends, teachers, and other family members were systematically undermined through a combination of supernatural manipulation and the natural consequences of his increasingly erratic behavior and emotional instability. This isolation created a psychological vacuum that could only be filled by the supernatural influences that were simultaneously working to corrupt and control his consciousness. The academic and social deterioration that characterized Peter's daily life during the possession process reveals the comprehensive nature of supernatural influence and its ability to affect every aspect of human existence. His declining performance in school, increasing conflicts with authority figures, and growing inability to maintain normal social relationships all reflected the systematic dismantling of his previous identity and the gradual emergence of supernatural influences within his consciousness. These changes occurred gradually enough to appear as natural responses to trauma and stress, concealing their true supernatural origin while creating conditions that facilitated deeper levels of possession. The sleep disturbances and altered states of consciousness that plagued Peter throughout the possession process served multiple functions within the supernatural manipulation strategy creating opportunities for direct entity contact, while simultaneously weakening his psychological defenses and rational thinking capabilities. The boundary between waking and sleeping consciousness became increasingly blurred as the possession progressed, allowing supernatural influences to operate more freely while making it difficult for Peter to distinguish between reality and supernatural manipulation. These altered states also provided opportunities for the entity to implant suggestions, false memories, and compulsive behaviors that would serve its ultimate objectives. The physical manifestations of the possession process revealed the systematic nature of the supernatural occupation and the gradual replacement of human consciousness with demonic influence. The involuntary movements, facial expressions, and vocal changes that began to characterize Peter's behavior reflected the increasing presence of Paimon's consciousness within his physical form, while simultaneously demonstrating the entity's growing control over his motor functions and sensory systems. These physical changes occurred gradually enough to be attributed to stress and trauma, while actually representing clear evidence of supernatural possession for those capable of recognizing the signs. The psychological fragmentation that accompanied Peter's possession involved the systematic breakdown of his integrated personality and the creation of internal divisions that could be exploited by supernatural forces seeking to establish permanent residence within his consciousness. This fragmentation process operated through the amplification of existing psychological conflicts and the introduction of new sources of internal tension that created multiple points of vulnerability for supernatural penetration. The result was a consciousness that became increasingly unstable and susceptible to external influence as the possession progressed. The manipulation of Peter's perception and memory throughout the possession process demonstrates the sophisticated techniques employed by supernatural entities to control human consciousness and create the specific psychological conditions necessary for successful occupation. His ability to accurately perceive and remember events became increasingly compromised as the entity gained greater influence over his mental processes, creating a subjective reality that served the supernatural agenda while isolating him from external sources of validation and support. This perceptual manipulation also served to conceal the true nature of his transformation from outside observers who might otherwise have recognized the supernatural influences at work. The exploitation of Peter's artistic and creative capabilities reveals the entity's specific interest in consciousness that possesses the capacity for complex expression and sophisticated communication. His natural talents in these areas made him particularly valuable as a vessel, because they provided channels through which the entity could manifest its own consciousness and communicate with the physical world. The gradual corruption of his creative expression served as both a tool for supernatural manifestation and a means of further eroding his individual identity and personal autonomy. The family dynamics that surrounded Peter's transformation created additional opportunities for supernatural manipulation while simultaneously providing camouflage for the possession process. The natural concern and confusion of his remaining family members regarding his deteriorating condition created emotional chaos that facilitated supernatural influence while making it difficult for anyone to recognize the true nature of the forces affecting him. The entity's ability to manipulate these family relationships served to isolate Peter further while creating additional sources of psychological pressure and emotional trauma. The climactic stages of Peter's possession reveal the ultimate objectives of the systematic erosion process and the specific conditions that must be achieved for successful supernatural occupation. The complete breakdown of his individual identity and the systematic replacement of his consciousness with demonic influence required the careful orchestration of multiple traumatic events and psychological pressures that created the precise combination of vulnerability and receptivity necessary for permanent possession. The success of this process demonstrates both the sophisticated nature of supernatural manipulation and the genuine reality of the forces involved in authentic demonic possession. The irreversible nature of Peter's transformation reflects the permanent consequences of successful supernatural possession and the reality that certain forms of spiritual contamination cannot be undone through conventional means. Once the entity achieved complete control over his consciousness and physical form, the original Peter ceased to exist as an independent entity, becoming instead a vessel for supernatural expression and manifestation. This permanent transformation serves as a warning about the serious dangers associated with supernatural contact and the devastating consequences that can result from exposure to entities possessing the knowledge and power to systematically corrupt human consciousness and identity. The culmination of Peter's systematic destruction represents the ultimate achievement of supernatural manipulation and the complete realization of Ellen's decades-long ritual planning, as every element of psychological pressure, emotional trauma, and spiritual contamination converges to create the precise conditions necessary for total consciousness replacement. The final stages of his dismantling operate with mechanical precision, stripping away the last vestiges of individual identity, personal will, and human resistance that might interfere with the entity's complete occupation of his physical and spiritual being. This process unfolds with the inexorable logic of a carefully designed machine, each component serving its specific function within a larger system that transforms human consciousness into a suitable vessel for supernatural manifestation. The emotional dismantling that precedes the final possession involves the systematic destruction of every psychological anchor and emotional connection that previously provided Peter with stability, meaning, and motivation for continued resistance. The accumulated weight of guilt, grief, and psychological trauma creates a state of complete emotional exhaustion that leaves him incapable of generating the energy necessary to maintain his individual identity or resist external influence. This emotional devastation serves not merely as a byproduct of supernatural manipulation, but as a carefully orchestrated component of the possession process that creates optimal conditions for consciousness replacement. The mental fragmentation that accompanies Peter's final breakdown involves the complete dissolution of rational thinking processes and the systematic destruction of cognitive frameworks that normally provide structure and coherence to human consciousness. His ability to distinguish between reality and supernatural manipulation becomes completely compromised as the entity gains total control over his perceptual systems and memory functions. This mental collapse creates a psychological vacuum that can only be filled by the supernatural consciousness that has been systematically preparing to occupy his physical form throughout the extended possession process. The spiritual dimension of Peter's dismantling encompasses the complete severing of his connection to human nature, moral frameworks, and the fundamental values that previously defined his identity and purpose. This spiritual destruction operates at levels that transcend psychological manipulation to encompass the actual corruption of his essential being and the systematic replacement of human consciousness with demonic influence. The thoroughness of this spiritual contamination ensures that no aspect of his original identity remains intact to interfere with the entity's complete occupation and control of his physical vessel. The inevitability that characterizes the final stages of the possession process reflects the cumulative effect of years of careful planning and systematic manipulation that created conditions where resistance became impossible and alternative outcomes were eliminated. Every element of the supernatural campaign had been designed to converge at this precise moment, creating a perfect storm of psychological vulnerability, spiritual contamination, and environmental conditions that made successful possession not merely likely but absolutely certain. This inevitability demonstrates the sophisticated nature of supernatural planning and the reality that authentic demonic entities operate according to principles that far exceed human understanding of strategy and manipulation. The moment of consciousness transfer represents one of the most profound and disturbing transformations depicted in contemporary cinema, as Peter's individual awareness is systematically displaced and replaced by an ancient and malevolent intelligence that has waited decades for this opportunity. The departure of his original consciousness occurs not through violent expulsion, but through gradual displacement as the supernatural presence expands to fill every aspect of his being while his individual identity simply ceases to exist. This process reflects the reality that successful demonic possession involves complete replacement rather than simple influence or control. The literal nature of the coronation ceremony that follows the successful possession emphasizes that the transformation represents genuine supernatural achievement rather than symbolic or metaphorical change. The physical crown that adorns Peter's head serves as tangible evidence of Paimon's successful manifestation and his legitimate claim to sovereignty within the physical realm. This coronation operates according to authentic ceremonial principles that establish formal recognition of the entity's authority while providing visible confirmation of the ritual's successful completion. The transformation of Peter's body into a throne for supernatural consciousness reveals the ultimate purpose of the extended possession process and the specific objectives that motivated Ellen's lifetime of planning and preparation. His physical form becomes not merely a vessel for demonic influence, but an actual seat of power from which the entity can exercise authority and influence within the human realm. This transformation represents the complete subjugation of human nature to supernatural will and the establishment of a permanent foothold for demonic influence within physical reality. The architectural and environmental elements that surround the coronation ceremony recreate with disturbing accuracy the spatial requirements and symbolic arrangements described in historical accounts of demonic manifestation and supernatural sovereignty. The treehouse setting provides the elevated position traditionally associated with divine or infernal authority, while simultaneously creating the isolation necessary for the completion of complex supernatural workings. The careful arrangement of ritual implements, symbolic decorations, and ceremonial elements all serve to establish the formal framework necessary for legitimate supernatural coronation. The presence of the cult members during the coronation ceremony provides the human witnesses necessary to validate the supernatural achievement and establish formal recognition of Paimon's successful manifestation. Their participation in the ceremony serves multiple functions, including the provision of psychic energy necessary to sustain the entity's physical presence and the creation of a human support network that can facilitate his ongoing operations within the physical realm. The reverence and submission displayed by these witnesses confirms the genuine nature of the supernatural transformation and the legitimate authority that the entity now wields. The psychological impact of witnessing the coronation extends beyond the immediate participants to encompass broader implications for understanding the nature of reality and the hidden forces that may operate within human civilization. The complete transformation of an ordinary teenager into a vessel for ancient supernatural consciousness challenges fundamental assumptions about human nature, individual identity, and the boundaries between natural and supernatural existence. This transformation serves as a demonstration of the genuine power possessed by authentic supernatural entities and the serious consequences that can result from contact with such forces. The permanence of the transformation achieved through Peter's possession reflects the irreversible nature of successful supernatural occupation and the reality that certain forms of spiritual contamination cannot be undone through conventional means. The entity's complete control over his physical form and consciousness ensures that the original Peter can never be recovered or restored, making the possession a permanent victory for supernatural forces and a permanent loss for human nature. This permanence serves as a warning about the serious risks associated with supernatural contact and the devastating consequences that can result from exposure to entities possessing genuine power and malevolent intent. The broader implications of the successful coronation extend beyond the immediate family to encompass questions about the ongoing influence of supernatural entities within human society and the extent to which similar operations may be occurring throughout civilization. The achievement of permanent physical manifestation provides Paimon with unprecedented opportunities for direct influence and manipulation within the human realm, creating possibilities for expanded supernatural operations that could affect countless additional individuals and families. This success also serves as a model and inspiration for other supernatural entities seeking to achieve similar manifestations within physical reality. The ultimate significance of Peter's transformation lies not in the horror of his individual fate, but in the demonstration of authentic supernatural power and the revelation of forces that operate beyond human understanding or control. His coronation as a vessel for demonic consciousness represents the successful completion of one of the most complex and demanding rituals in the entire corpus of ceremonial magic, providing tangible proof of the reality and power of the supernatural realm. This achievement serves as both warning and revelation, demonstrating the genuine dangers that exist beyond the boundaries of ordinary human experience, while confirming the reality of forces that most people prefer to dismiss as fiction or superstition. The figure of Paimon transcends the boundaries of individual supernatural entity to embody a fundamental archetype that has haunted human civilization since the dawn of consciousness, representing the eternal temptation to pursue knowledge and power without regard for the moral and spiritual consequences of such pursuit. His influence operates not merely through direct supernatural contact, but through the systematic corruption of human ambition itself, transforming the natural desire for understanding and capability into an insatiable hunger that consumes everything of genuine value in human existence. This archetypal function explains his enduring presence throughout history and his particular relevance to contemporary civilization, where the pursuit of advancement and achievement has increasingly displaced traditional concerns for wisdom, ethics, and spiritual development. The unchaining of ambition from ethical constraints represents one of the most dangerous developments in human consciousness, creating conditions where intelligence and capability serve destructive rather than constructive purposes. Paimon's influence facilitates this separation by providing knowledge and power that appear to transcend moral limitations, while gradually eroding the practitioner's capacity for ethical reasoning and spiritual discernment. The result is a form of advancement that destroys the very foundations of human dignity and meaning, while creating the illusion of progress and achievement. This corruption of ambition operates so subtly that its victims often remain unaware of their transformation until the process has become irreversible. The divorce of capability from wisdom creates individuals and institutions that possess tremendous power to effect change, while lacking the understanding necessary to direct that power toward beneficial outcomes. Paimon's teachings provide access to advanced knowledge and sophisticated techniques, while systematically undermining the moral and spiritual development that should guide their application. This imbalance between capability and wisdom has become increasingly characteristic of modern civilization, where technological advancement and institutional power have far outpaced ethical development and spiritual understanding, creating unprecedented opportunities for both achievement and destruction. The modern manifestations of Paimon's influence can be observed throughout contemporary society in systems and institutions that demand the sacrifice of authenticity and individual identity in exchange for advancement and recognition. Academic institutions that prioritize publication and funding over genuine learning, corporate structures that reward manipulation and exploitation over ethical behavior, and political systems that value power acquisition over public service all reflect the archetypal patterns associated with his influence. These systems operate according to principles that systematically corrupt human nature while providing tangible rewards for those willing to surrender their moral compass and authentic selfhood. The technological revolution that characterizes contemporary civilization provides unprecedented opportunities for the manifestation of Paimon's archetypal influence, creating systems of communication, surveillance, and control that can shape human consciousness on scales previously impossible. The algorithms that govern social media platforms, the artificial intelligence systems that increasingly influence human decision-making, and the data collection networks that monitor and predict human behavior all reflect the systematic application of knowledge without wisdom that characterizes his domain of influence. These technological systems often operate according to principles that prioritize efficiency and control over human dignity and spiritual development. The educational institutions that should serve as guardians of wisdom and ethical development have increasingly become vehicles for the transmission of Paimon's archetypal influence, emphasizing technical knowledge and career advancement over moral development and spiritual understanding. The systematic replacement of liberal arts education with vocational training, the prioritization of measurable outcomes over genuine learning, and the increasing commercialization of higher education all reflect the corruption of knowledge that occurs when capability becomes divorced from wisdom. Students emerge from these institutions with sophisticated technical skills, but often lack the ethical framework and spiritual foundation necessary to use those skills constructively. The scientific and medical establishments that wield enormous influence over contemporary society often display characteristics that reflect Paimon's archetypal patterns, pursuing knowledge and capability without adequate consideration of the moral and spiritual implications of their work. The development of technologies for surveillance and control, the creation of biological weapons and genetic modifications, and the systematic suppression of research that challenges established paradigms all demonstrate how the pursuit of knowledge can become corrupted when separated from ethical constraints and spiritual wisdom. These institutions often operate according to principles that prioritize advancement and recognition over genuine service to humanity. The economic systems that govern contemporary civilization reflect many of the characteristics associated with Paimon's influence, creating structures that reward manipulation, exploitation, and the systematic destruction of human and environmental resources in pursuit of abstract measures of success. The financial instruments that extract wealth from productive activity, the corporate structures that prioritize shareholder returns over employee welfare, and the marketing systems that manipulate human psychology for commercial purposes all demonstrate how economic activity can become divorced from ethical considerations and genuine human benefit. The political systems that claim to serve democratic principles often operate according to patterns that reflect Paimon's archetypal influence, creating structures that prioritize power acquisition and maintenance over genuine public service and ethical governance. The manipulation of public opinion through sophisticated propaganda techniques, the systematic corruption of electoral processes through financial influence, and the creation of policies that serve elite interests while claiming to benefit the general population all demonstrate how political power can become divorced from moral purpose and authentic leadership. The cultural and artistic expressions that shape contemporary consciousness often reflect the influence of Paimon's archetypal patterns, promoting values and perspectives that systematically undermine human dignity and spiritual development while appearing to celebrate creativity and individual expression. The entertainment industry's promotion of violence, materialism, and moral relativism, the art world's embrace of nihilism and transgression, and the literary establishment's rejection of traditional moral and spiritual themes all demonstrate how cultural influence can be corrupted to serve destructive rather than constructive purposes. The most chilling aspect of Paimon's archetypal influence lies in its systematic and generational nature, operating through inherited systems and cultural patterns that shape human consciousness from birth while appearing to represent normal and natural aspects of civilization. The vessel for his influence is not stolen through dramatic supernatural intervention, but rather constructed through the gradual corruption of human institutions and the systematic transmission of corrupted values and perspectives across generations. Each generation inherits these corrupted systems as normal aspects of reality, making resistance increasingly difficult and transformation increasingly unlikely. The recognition that the monster represents not external supernatural threat but internal systemic corruption reveals the true horror of Paimon's archetypal influence and the extent to which contemporary civilization may already be serving his ultimate objectives. The ritual of corruption operates continuously through apparently normal social, educational, and economic processes that systematically destroy human authenticity and spiritual development while providing the illusion of progress and advancement. The house of civilization has become too dark to feel like home because its fundamental structures have been corrupted to serve purposes that are fundamentally hostile to human flourishing and spiritual development. The final warning embedded within Paimon's archetypal significance involves the recognition that the forces he represents operate not through dramatic supernatural intervention, but through the systematic corruption of human ambition and the gradual transformation of civilization itself into an instrument for the destruction of everything that makes existence meaningful and valuable. The true horror lies not in the possibility of supernatural possession, but in the reality that such possession may already be complete, operating through systems and institutions that have become so thoroughly corrupted that they serve destructive purposes while maintaining the appearance of normal and beneficial activity. The vessel has been built, the coronation has occurred, and the monster now rules through the very systems that claim to serve human welfare and advancement.